Shell. When father saw Roriger, his lips curled into a cruel smirk. His brows raised when the doors closed behind him. Roriger inhaled and exhaled through his nose gently to not let father get the better of him. And his eyes narrowed at him as he awaited father to say what he would. There he is. The champion of House Targaryen. The victor of the glorious Harrenhal tourney, he proclaimed with pride. But Roriger raised his brow in confusion. Oh, but wait. You are no champion, nor are you a victor. You, my son, the crown prince, were defeated by the heir to the high towers. Father's laugh angered Roriger. He had heard it many times. When he burned traitors in the throne room. And when he forced himself into mother's bedchambers. And this happens, just now. Now when your wife is carrying your second child. Or is it yours? Roriger glared hatefully at father for his insinuations. Perhaps Elia has been enamored with the far more handsome and skillful Baelor Hightower. Father asked with a thoughtful and innocent tone. Roriger's hands curled into fists, wanting nothing more than to beat father bloody. Have you finished, father? Demanded Roriger, his voice grating with hatred towards him with every word. Father narrowed his eyes at Roriger whilst Elia uncomfortably reached for Roriger's hand. He felt a calming presence in how she held his hand. Only for father to smirk. He waved them away. Leave, he commanded. Elia 6. Back in their bedchambers, Elia couldn't believe what she was hearing. That now, after enormous fortunes spent in preparing this tourney and organizing it and inviting nobility from across the realm in their hundreds, Roriger was backing away from what they had planned. Even with the tourney's true purpose in mind. What do you mean, Roriger? Asked Elia, with disbelief in her voice. She still couldn't quite believe what Roriger was saying. The plans have changed. It is too soon to act, Roriger replied with a frown. To what end? All of that coin. All of that time. All of these preparations. And all of this planning. And the promises we had made. All for what? What was any of this for? Roriger, we may not ever get this chance again, said Jon. He's right, Roriger. When once I saw his presence here as a danger, now it may be seen as a golden opportunity that we never saw coming, Arthur added. Roriger, here, Lord Went is our ally. But in King's Landing, he has all the power, Jon said wisely. But Roriger glared as he faced them all. Jon. Arthur. Oswell. And Elia. No. How many times must I say it? But why? Elia asked gently. We wait. We do not make a move until I say so, Roriger snapped. Until when? Asked Oswell. Until Elia gives birth to my heir. To an Aegon. Elia frowned slightly at what she had just heard. Is that all I am to you, Roriger? A broodmare? A vessel to bring your salvation against the prophecies which so haunt your dreams? Roriger, what of the allies we have made? All of them whom await our word and your command to act. Here in Harrenhal, in King's Landing and across the realm. They will be insulted. They may turn from our supporters and into your father's supporters if anything, said Arthur. They will do no such thing. Not after what they saw of my father here, Roriger said with conviction. Finally they left. Only Elia and Roriger remained. Elia stood up and walked just behind Roriger. She reached over and held his hands from behind. She heard how he exhaled softly at feeling her hands. Once we have returned to Dragonstone, we should write to all the Lords Paramount and to our allies. To inform them of this change in plans, Elia whispered softly. Roriger nodded. We will, he replied. But then she felt his body tense. Before she could ask what was wrong, she looked out at what he was staring at. But when she edged over, he wasn't merely staring. He was glaring with fury. And when she looked out at the window, she saw clearly the proud banner of House Hightower flying in the calm night southwestern winds of the Riverlands. Why did he crown you? Roriger demanded. Elia let go of his hands. She took a step back. She had never seen Roriger this angry before. And she felt a shiver as he turned around. Roriger, I have not seen him in 7 years. He was a suitor back then. But we have not exchanged words nor glances since his coming to Harrenhal and our meeting at the marketplace, she replied with a soothing tone of voice. Roriger frowned as he turned to her. Roriger, do not let your father get to you. You know full well what kind of man he is. The one whom has done what he has done to your mother. To innocent small folk whom have mocked him and to nobility whom call him the Mad King. He is trying to provoke you and to have you act out. Do not let him provoke you. You are a far better man than he ever was. He calmed at hearing her words. Finally he nodded. Elia exhaled a breath she had no idea she was holding. I'm sorry, Elia, he said. Elia warmly embraced him, which he reciprocated with his long and lithe arms around her. It's all right, Roriger, she whispered before kissing his cheek. Will you stay with me tonight to write those letters, he asked. I cannot, I have a previous engagement to attend, she replied. What, he asked. Arthur, Oberyn, Lara, Miria and I attend his sister's wedding to Eddard Stark in the Godswood. Very well, he replied with a nod, just as Elia realized an opportunity, which she now shared with him. And whilst I am there, I will speak to Brandon Stark, Elbereth Arryn and Robert Baratheon on the matter, she continued. He nodded at hearing that. Yes, good. But will any of Hoster Tully's children be in attendance, he asked. If there are, I will ask them to pass on a letter to their father, she replied. Notes. Roriger calls everything off. After all that money spent. All in a fit of jealousy. Not nice when someone crowns another man's wife as their queen of love and beauty, isn't it, Roriger? Chapter 35, A Loving Wedding. Summary. The Wedding of the Quiet Wolf and the Maid with the Laughing Purple Eyes. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Ashura 7. In the place of father, Arthur held Ashura's hand and escorted her before the heart tree of Harrenhal's Godswood. Though neither had met the other's father, nor had formally asked for permission, none of that mattered. Neither to Ashura or to Ned. The gathering of those in attendance was small. But Ashura was glad that all whom were there were all friends and close family of both she and Ned. Arthur, Elia, Miria, Lara, Oberyn, Oswell and Luwin were in attendance for her. And for Ned, there was Brandon, Lyanna, Benjen, Elbereth and Jon Arryn, Robertson Baratheon, Caitlin and Lysa Tully, Mark Ryswell, Willam Dustin, Howland Reed, Jeffrey Mallister and Jon and Kyle Royce. Walking across the Godswood, Ashura beamed when she saw Ned. In spite of knowing each other for a little more than a week, Ashura loved Ned more than she had ever loved a man or a woman in her life. She loved how he loved her. And how he treated her as though she was the most heavenly thing in the world. Ned turned around and blushed when he saw her. She wore a wedding dress knitted by she, Elia, Lara and Miria in the few hours they had had since Ned proposed to her. It was violet in color and with silvery studs around the dress, as though they were stars. Ned does look good in that doublet. But he looks so much better without anything on at all. We both do. And we will enjoy that tonight, Ashura thought as she began to feel a dampness in her underclothes at the thought. And from remembering what they did the night that he proposed to her, Ashura smiled that she was going to have a loving marriage with Ned. As a girl, she had hoped for a loving marriage. She lost all hopes for that as she grew up and lost all affection and favor with father. But now, she felt so sure that she would want for nothing in a life with Ned. As wonderful as this is, I do feel for sweet Elia. After today, she deserves better. She deserves only the best of the world from all she has endured since the day she wed Roriger and endured all the scorn from the Northrons, thought Ashura. Briefly, she remembered with bitterness of Elia's wedding to Roriger. Whilst he had not been unkind, he did not stop any of the gossiping or scorn from nobility whom mocked Elia. And called her foul things such as wanton whore, desert snake and salacious seductress. But Roriger did nothing to stop it. And now, when Baelor Hightower crowned her, all eyes were on her once again. At how she was a whore and a seductress for seducing the handsome Hightower champion. When something happens, it's always Elia's fault. Though it could never be perfect Roriger's fault, could it? Ashura blinked away the problems and the issues that followed dear sweet Elia wherever she went. Now when she stood with Ned before the magnificent heart tree. I turned my back on the Seven long ago. Perhaps I should give the old gods a chance. Who comes before the old gods this day? Asked Brandon Stark. Ashura of House Dane comes to be wed. A woman grown, true-born and noble. She comes to beg the blessings of the old gods. Whom claims her? Eddard of House Stark. Whom gives her? Arthur of House Dane. Her brother. Lady Ashura, do you take this man? Asked Ned's older brother. I take this man. Ashura beamed as she held Ned's hand and stood beside him, facing the heart tree. Whilst Arthur stood in between Elia and Oswell. You may now cloak the bride under your protection, said Brandon. Ashura grinned seductively at Ned as he reached for her Dane-embroidered cloak, wrapped around her shoulders. Truthfully, she enjoyed making Ned blush. For she adored how adorable he looked. But now, as he unclasped her cloak and gently put it to one side, Ashura felt something long and thick brush against her leg as he wrapped his Stark-embroidered cloak around her shoulders. You. There it is. The one part of you, dear Ned, that only I will see of you. And how I cannot wait to feel it inside me once again, tonight. And all nights from this day forth. As Ned clasped the cloak around her, he beamed as he faced her. Ashura loved seeing Ned smile like this for her. And so, he leant in and kissed her gently on the lips. Ashura wrapped her hands around him as they kissed. Gods, this has to be the best day of my life. And there is still more to come. I love you, Ned Stark, she whispered. And I love you, Ashdane, he replied. No. It's Ashura Stark. And it always will be, she whispered before kissing him hard again whilst all guests applauded. Notes. Ned and Ashura are now married. Now they go together to the Uri. Chapter 36, Rising from the Ashes. Summary. Vargid and Valerie's talk and plan for the future. And Robert and Lyanna talk one more time before he returns to the Uri and she to Winterfell. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Vargid 3. Vargid scoffed when he looked around the great manse of House Daltala. He thought of how much it had changed since Valerys had become First Magister of Lies. Since he wed Valerys' daughter. And now was one of the most powerful men in the Free Cities, if not all of Essos. The Unsullied whom guarded his manse had tripled in numbers. And they were joined by a company of archers. All of whom regularly patrolled around the manse. As well as a few platoons of cavalry whom often patrolled around. Valerys is not the sort of man whom would waste millions in coin for pointless decoration. He only spends his coin on the most practical of purposes. He would not spend a king's ransom on building an enormous palace like Harrenhal had built the dark and beautiful Harrenhal, Vargid thought as a slave took hold of the reins of his horse and Vargid climbed down. Welcome, Master Vargid. Eksho awaits you in his solar, said Valerie's personal attendant and trusted slave, Bacietos. Very well. Let us go, Vargid replied with a nod. He walked with Bacietos from the courtyard and to the small palace that lay in the middle of the great manse. As far as he could see, the only decoration that Valerys had added were the banners of his house around the balconies and walls. Walking inside the palace, Vargid passed the study, where Valerys' grandchildren were studying under the guidance of their tutor, Aristatos. A trusted and educated slave of Valerys whom had previously tutored and taught Valerys' children. And now whom tutored Valerys' grandchildren. And at his solar, Vargid saw Valerys finish issuing a few edicts to some slaves. Have these sent by horse to their intended recipients as swiftly as possible, he said calmly after sealing them with the seal of the First Magister of Lies. Yes, Eksho, they replied before taking their leave. He turned, as though noticing Vargid for the first time. Ah, Vargid. Do come inside, he said pleasantly. Vargid did as he was invited to do so. He sat beside Valerys as he put his quill in his inkpot and let it rest there. Vargid noticed how smudged his hands were from writing. He noticed it also. For he stood up and walked to a nearby water basin. He dipped his hands in the waters and began to rub them before taking a towel from a nearby slave. Do leave, he bid the slave. Eksho, he replied before taking his leave. Valerys sat back down and faced Vargid. Now, Goodson, might I ask how my dear daughter is? She is well, Valerys. She is glad that she could bring her trusted and favorite slaves from here to our new home in the city, he replied. Valerys smiled at that. I am glad to hear that. But, now, the reason why you are here. And there it is. I am never invited here unless it is something important. But now that he is First Magister, what glorious vision does he heave for the future? And what place do I have in it? We have come far. But there is more to accomplish. For this was but merely the first part of my grand plans for Lies the Lovely, he said. Indeed. Then what is next for Lies' power to eclipse that of Bravos and of Volantis? Asked Vargid. Valerie smiled at the question. What could this be? Ah, my friend, that is the very question. And yet my predecessors and my peers of the past were all too content to feed on the scrapings those and others had left behind. It shouldn't be like this. And that is what I want to achieve. To change all of that. For Lies and for all Liesans. In what way? To resurrect a power that once was a great power in Essos. To the extent that it's even a rival in power and wealth to the 7 kingdoms of West Eos, he replied ambitiously. Instantly, Vargid knew of what he spoke. There's only one thing he can be talking about, he realized. The Triarchy. The Triarchy, indeed. Yes, to reform such a thing will not be easy, but it will make our power greater. And slowly, like manticore venom, we will end the hegemony of West Eos, Valerie said grandly. Robert V. Robert beamed as he walked with Lyanna from Harrenhal's marketplace and back to the northern encampment. Though he felt a bitter sadness that they did have to part. But he felt an assurance as he walked with her. That he truly did love her. And that she did feel the same for he. I will write as much as I am able to, Lyanna, he said with a beaming smile to her. She turned and faced him. Hers was also a beaming smile. Which only served to make him blush and feel a cheeriness in himself he never felt before. And I look forward to your letters, Robert. And to seeing you again and seeing Storm's End for the first time, she said before standing on her tiptoes and kissing his cheek. Robert felt his cheeks flame with a deep blush like Ned's would whenever he was in the presence of his beloved Ashura. Robert felt a beaming smile stretch in his face as offered her hand to him. He bowed and kissed it before standing straight again. As she left and resumed her walk to join her brothers, Robertson exhaled a deep breath he was holding. And finally, he turned his gaze from her. Gods, do I love her? I love her so much. I could never ever love a woman as I love her. She deserves the best life. And I will give it to her. In Storm's End. As he walked back to the Stormlands encampment, Robert smiled as he imagined himself wedding Lyanna in Storm's End. He loved the idea of showing her around the great round hall. And especially of riding around the lands of Storm's End and up and down the coastlines. Robert had never felt this happy ever since long before mother and father had died. When they did, he tried to show he had moved on. He did so, by drinking, fighting and whoring. But now, he intended to calm down on the first 2. And abstain from the third completely. I will always be faithful to her. I could never betray her. She once believed in the reputation that followed me after my time in the Uri. It is only now that she sees me for whom I truly am. And I can never ever lose that. Robert smiled when he reached down his shirt and picked it out. It was a necklace mother had sent him from searching in Lies for a bride for Roriga. A silver chain and with an onyx stag on a gold background. When Robert had first received from a raven in Lies, he thought to only wear it in mother's presence, to make her happy. But since the day that he had heard of the sinking of the Wind Proud, there was never a day in which he never wore it. As he held it, he looked down at it. I love her, mother and father. I hope you will be proud of me, as I shall soon leave the Uri and return to Stormend. And begin my reign as Lord Paramount of the Stormlands. It is something I will do, with my Lyanna at my side. Robert approached Stannis, whom was issuing commands to various servants and squires. Brother Robert called. Stannis turned and faced Robert. Robert Stannis replied with a nod before walking towards him. Is all well? Stannis asked rigidly. He was stood as though he was a king's guard waiting outside of a brothel for a king to run out of before his queen found him. Calm, brother. Calm yourself, Robert said at first. Stannis only relaxed his arms. But the rest of his body remained rigid, as though expecting an important command from Robert. I shall be returning to Storm's End within half a year, maybe even beforehand. In any case, until I do, I want you to regularly send me letters on all relevant and important news from Storm's End and the Stormlands. Anything important, I will need to know it, said Robert. Stannis' brows raised at hearing that. But then he nodded. I shall see to it personally, brother. If that is all, he asked. Yes, that's all. I shall see you then, Stannis, said Robert before he extended his arms out and hugged Stannis. Stannis did not even move his arms. Are you drunk? Robert boomed with laughter at that. Drunk? No. But we have never held any affection for each other, Stannis dully replied. We have not. But I do wish for there to be any bad blood between us, Stannis. We are brothers. And I know that neither mother nor father would want to see us so at odds with each other. At that Stannis did not. They would not, no, he agreed. Then, from this day forth, let us love each other as brothers and serve Storm's End and House Baratheon. Indeed, he replied before taking his leave. Robert turned and began to make his way back to the Vale encampment. Notes. Now Valerie's intentions are revealed. He intends to re-establish the Triarchy. And for lies to be at the center of it. And on an unrelated note, the word Exo means master in Valyrian. Chapter 37, The Southern Wolf. Summary. Elia returns to Dragonstone with Rhaenys. And Brandon, Lyanna and Benjen return to Winterfell. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Elia 7. Come, Rhaenys. We are back home, said Elia. Elia beamed down at Rhaenys as she climbed out of bed, cuddling Balerion in her arms. Home, Mama? Asked Rhaenys. Yes, my little dragoness, back home. In Dragonstone, replied Elia, before kneeling down and kissing her forehead. I see that this princess needs rescuing from such a dangerous little dragon. Elia beamed as she turned around to Uncle Luwin. Yes, Uncle, because this one is such a dangerous dragon, Elia teased as she held Rhaenys' hand. Rhaenys understood little of what they said, for she was beaming up at them and still cuddling and stroking Balerion, whom was purring in reply. Elia walked with Rhaenys and Uncle Luwin to the forecastle of the ship, just as sailors were lowering the anchor. My princesses, welcome back home, warmly said Maester Alyn. Thank you, Maester, said Elia with a warm smile. Whilst Rhaenys climbed onto the quay and ran up to Dragonstone's Maester and hugged his leg. Hello, princess. It warms my old heart to see you back here, he said with a chuckle and a beaming smile for her. How are things here? Elia asked as Uncle Luwin helped her onto the quay. All is well, my princess, he replied with a nod. And has there been any letters from the Crown Prince? There has not, my princess, he replied. Elia did not frown. Since marrying Rhaegar and becoming Crown Princess, she had striven to show an image of a happy princess and future queen for all the realm to see her. She did this to follow the example of R'hllor. An example which R'hllor said she never failed to live up to. But at the news that Rhaegar had sent no letters upset her. Has his father continued to poison his mind with rants about my impure Dornish blood and that I am not a worthy match for the dragon blood of Valyria? Or does he think that I am no better than Bethany Bracken and that Baelor is Terence Toyne? Elia noticed from the corner of her eye how Uncle Luwin, Lara and Miria all frowned at the mention of Rhaegar not sending her any letters. Well, let us not idle here any longer than necessary, Elia said sweetly before leading them towards the nearby stables, where she was glad to see a wheelhouse awaiting them. Good. I don't think I could ride a horse right now. From what she had learnt of the Maester of Duskendale before they departed for Dragonstone, she had been carrying their second child for 3 moons. But throughout the voyage, Elia thought back to giving birth to Rhaenys. And just how she struggled to give birth to her. And how she was bedridden for half a year. Elia rested her back in the wheelhouse, whilst sitting with Rhaenys and Balerion on one side. And Lara and Miria were sat on the opposite side. Ofttimes, Elia found herself wondering where Ash was. Before reminding herself that she was now married. Though Elia adored Ash and was elated for her that she was now happily wed to a good and honourable man, whom loved her dearly, Elia felt sad. She was sad for she missed her friend. And as much as she missed her, she could never ask for she and Ned to stay in King's Landing and Dragonstone with her. She knew that Ash despised it in King's Landing and Dragonstone both, but tolerated both for Elia's sake. Upon their arrival in Dragonstone, Elia was escorted by Uncle Luwin to her bedchambers, where she rested with both Rhaenys and Balerion. before Maester Alyn took Rhaenys and Balerion to the nursery. Elia thought that she would make some time to play with her later whilst she lay down and listened to Maester Alyn on what to do in her current state. In spite of carrying her second child, which did limit what she could and couldn't do, Elia was happy. In spite of Rhaegar still in King's Landing, she was happy, for she had Rhaenys, Lara and Miria by her side. And she enjoyed the peace and serenity of Dragonstone, having spent less than 2 weeks in Harrenhal, with thousands of nobles and small folk from all kingdoms of Westeros in attendance. But now that she was reunited with Rhaenys, Elia was happy, whilst thinking of the second child she would be giving birth to, 6 moons from now. However, as she thought of Rhaenys having a smaller sibling, she thought back to when she grew up in the Water Gardens. With Oberyn, his best friends Miles Manwadi and Quentin Corgyle, Lara, Miria and of course Ash. Once I give birth, and Rhaegar has calmed down, and he has finally removed Aes, we should think about having noble children from the realm ward at King's Landing. It would be wonderful to have a child from Ned and Ash ward at King's Landing. Rhaenys and her future siblings need to have friends. I do not want them to grow up so isolated in the Red Keep. Lyanna v. Lyanna beamed when she saw the faint outlines of Winterfell in the distance. In the weeks they had travelled to Harrenhal, the days they spent there and the weeks they had spent returning home, had filled Lyanna with a deep longing and love for home. But now there it was. Winterfell. Gods, I have never truly appreciated just how spectacular and beautiful Winterfell is. In comparison, Harrenhal stands like the great giants of old whilst Winterfell stands like a dwarf. But I could never call Harrenhal home. Winterfell is home. But as she thought of home, she thought of him. He whom was in her thoughts from the ride from Harrenhal to Winterfell. She had thought of him from Winterfell to Harrenhal also, but for different reasons than why she thought of him now. Robert is a good man. I should have paid attention to Neddy and not been so stubborn. But so long as I may keep to the old gods in Storm's End and Robert treats me well, then I shall be happy. What are you thinking of? Lyanna turned to Benjen. She shrugged. What father might say about Ned, she replied. She didn't want to endure teasing from Benny if she admitted the truth. Father won't be angry, will he? He asked. He shouldn't. It is a marriage made for love and without any hindrance to House Stark. Lyanna and Benny turned to Brandon as he rode alongside them. Father married mother out of love. He would be a fool to think that Ned cannot do the same, he said. Then why can we not do the same? You. Me. And Benny. What if father intends to have him wed a northern bride? He may complain about Neddy, saying that he does not care for his duty or his honor as a Stark, Lyanna pointed out. Ned is nothing if not dutiful or honorable. Even now, when wed to his beloved Ashura. Which is what we will say to him when we see him, Brandon said pointedly. At which both Lyanna and Benny agreed. He's right. Neddy is the one whom has been away from home the most. And has grown up far from the north. He deserves some happiness the most out of us. And Ashura makes him the happiest in all of the years I have seen of him. They arrived in Winterfell and rode through the Winter City until they reached the Great Keep. Lyanna nodded when she saw the first keep and the broken tower. The repairs and restoration works at both had been completed. The broken tower stood tall, unbroken and complete. And as for the first keep, it stood as tall and restored as the Great Keep. What will the first keep be used for now? Benjen wondered. For esteemed and honored guests. Lyanna turned around to face father. Tall, ferocious, hardy and muscular, stood the Lord of Winterfell as he greeted 3 of his 4 children. Lyanna climbed down from Petal, whilst Benny climbed down from Winter and Brandon climbed down from Wild. Lyanna smiled as the 3 stood before father. He sternly looked at them before he beamed and laughed. Ah, welcome home, he boomed before he hugged each of them. Lyanna smiled as she embraced father. Together, the 4 walked inside the Great Keep. And tell me, how was Ned? He asked. Lyanna, Benny and Brandon shared a look. Whom will tell him? Ned is well, father. A skilled swordsman, and as dutiful and honorable as his foster father has taught him to be, said Brandon. Father nodded with a proud smile before Benny continued. Though he is brooding and was too shy to ask beautiful women to dance with him, Benny added. Father pursed his lips at that. He hummed in thought, just as his odious South-loving friend, Maester Wallers stood by his side like a loyal dog. "I didn't think of that," he said. "That shouldn't be a problem, my lord. Lord Eddard is young still. There is no need for him to be as unafraid around women and unafraid in showing his affections for them as Lord Brandon does," he said shrewdly. Lyanna frowned at him. "It's all fucking you. You're the one that poisoned father to think only of the south and not of the north. Is it any wonder that the bannermen think father wants to be more southern than northerner?" "That won't be an issue, father," said Brandon. "Why would it not be? He needs to be wed. And the match must be to strengthen the north before he can be made Lord of Moat Cailin," said father, with Maester Wallers nodding like a lickspittle. "No, father. Neddy is already wed." Father and Maester Wallers turned to Lyanna in surprise. "What?" "It's true, father. The day before we left Harrenhal, Neddy wed a Dornish woman before the old gods at Harrenhal's Godswood." At the mention of a Dornish woman, Maester Wallers frowned in disgust. "Are you one of those reachmen whom despise the Dornish? Ashura told me plenty of you types. How can you be so petty to hate them? That is fucking pathetic." "Lord Eddard is wed to a Dornish woman?" Maester Wallers asked incredulously. "You say that as though Ned has wed a fucking free weasel," Lyanna thought contemptuously as she rolled her eyes at him. Her name is Ashura Dane. She is a kind and very beautiful woman. And they love each other dearly," said Brandon. "And she is a former lady-in-waiting to Princess Elia," Father Benny added. Hearing that, father's eyes opened wide before he nodded in consideration. "Perhaps not such a terrible setback," father muttered. "But my lord, perhaps some reconsideration would not be amiss. For it would not do for a Dornish woman to wed a noble Stark of Winterfell. For the tales they all tell of the Dornish tell that they are a salacious and viperous people and with no honor. One must remember how they murdered King Daeron. She is sister to Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning. And is not some harlot or whore." Maester Lyanna snapped at him, unhesitatingly to defend Neddy and his beloved wife. Maester Wallers gulped at being confronted by Lyanna in such a way. Brandon smirked and nodded proudly at Lyanna's confrontation. "Calm yourselves. All of you," father commanded. They all turned back to father as he turned to face them. "I had been planning to wed him to a northern lady, that we might show the bannermen that we have not forgotten about them," said father. "There will be no success in divorcing them, father. They love each other very much and were wed before Harrenhal's heart tree," said Brandon. Father grunted before running his fingers through his beard in consideration. "And what of your own futures?" "Brandon, with Caitlin Tully. And Lyanna, with Robert Baratheon." As Lyanna remembered how she was adamant that she would not wed him, she could not believe how she had changed her mind since then. "Caitlin Tully is a bonny and beautiful lass, father. And clever too. She will make a fine lady of Winterfell," Brandon said. Father nodded at that. "And what thinks she of the old gods?" he asked. Brandon grimaced at that. "She is faithful to the Seven, and I don't see how that will change," he admitted. Father frowned before turning to his worm-like maester. "House Marndale is faithful to the Seven, my lord. I don't see how that would be an issue to Winterfell, the North and the future of House Stark. So long as the Lady Caitlin respects the faith of the old gods and knows full well that her children with Lord Brandon will have to be raised in the ways of the Starks and the old gods," he said. Father nodded with pursed lips before he turned to Lyanna. "And what of you, Lyanna?" he asked with a sweet smile. Lyanna smiled in reply. "I'm glad to say that I was wrong about him." Father wasn't expecting that. "Truly, Lyanna?" he asked. "She surprised all of us with this, father," Brandon said with a grin, smirking at the reactions of both father and Maester Wallers. Lyanna tried not to laugh at their reactions. "So, the stories of him were exaggerations?" "They were. And he showed me that he is a good man," she replied. Father beamed proudly at them. "I am proud of you all. But, I have talked a plenty. You all must be tired from your journey and hungry. You all go and eat and rest. We'll speak more later," he said. Notes. Despite Elia being pregnant, Rhaegar is too busy, reading about prophecies obsessively to care for his wife. Whilst Ricard is convinced of the merits of Ned's marriage to Ashura and is proud of Brandon and Lyanna meeting their future spouses. Chapter 38, The Kraken and the Seahorse. Summary. Harlon and Lucerys meet, after the former was advised to do so by Roriger. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Lucerys 2. Lucerys was glad to have spent some time, even if it was indeed brief, at home in Driftmark. He did not enjoy being in King's Landing. He loved his home of Driftmark, where generations of Valerius had set sail from in search of adventure and wealth. None more so than Lucerys' hero, his ancestor Corlys Valerian. Ever since Aes had journeyed to Harrenhal for the tourney, Lucerys took this as a chance to spend time at home. Back home, he spent time with his two sons. He had two. His true-born son, Montford, heir to Driftmark, and his bastard, Oren. Montford was the only son of Lucerys and his wife, Laenra Celtigar. She died 2 years after Montford was born. And Oren was born from Lucerys' mistress during his marriage. She died giving birth to Oren. Lucerys raised both his sons in Driftmark. He raised them differently, for he knew that both could not inherit the seat of Driftmark. Montford, of course, whom inherited his name, was the heir to Driftmark and House Valerian. And as for Oren, he was raised as a sailor and proud captain. Lucerys was glad that there was no enmity between his two sons. They loved each other dearly, which made him happy. For he knew well the gossip said behind his back about bringing Oren into his household and raising him as his son. There was talk that Oren would murder him, as was often said of bastards. But because they were both raised in different ways, Lucerys was glad that there was no ambitions for more from Oren nor paranoia about succession from Montford. For Oren, he knew, would be a great sea captain one day and perhaps be admiral of the royal fleet. And Montford would inherit the family seat and be lord of Driftmark and perhaps master of ships. As Lucerys stood up from his seat and walked to the balcony, he sighed and closed his eyes before smelling the fresh air of the narrow sea. Gods, I love the sea. And the promise of adventure when one sails from home and for unfamiliar lands. I wish I had been bold enough to have been like Corlys Valerian when I was Oren's age. Lucerys turned around to see Montford sat in Lucerys Solar, reading the weekly reports provided by Maester Brecker. Whilst Oren, he suspected, was supervising his ship being redecorated. It is better this way. Montford will be a good lord of Driftmark, whilst Oren shall be the adventurous sailor that I never was and perhaps be as adventuring and brave as his ancestor Corlys the Sea Snake. But the peaceful respite which Lucerys hoped to enjoy before his inevitable return to the capital was interrupted by a knocking on the door. Enter. Montford turned around whilst Lucerys stood behind his desk and saw Maester Brecker enter. He held a letter in his hand. A raven just came, my lord. From King's Landing, asked Montford. No, my lord. From the Greyjoys. The Greyjoys. What could this be about? Montford turned to Lucerys as Lucerys accepted the letter from Maester Brecker. What could this be about, father, he asked. Lucerys shrugged with confusion. I do not know. Unless Oren did something to annoy them, I know not, he said. Though that does sound like something Oren would do, he did nothing to provoke them, he said with surety. How can you be so certain? Asked Lucerys. He tells me everything. And he has told me that in all of his voyages across the seas, he has never once come across the Ironborn, nor has he run afoul of them, he explained. Lucerys smiled that they were close in that they shared everything. Lucerys opened the letter. He nodded when he saw it was indeed the Kraken sigil of House Greyjoy of Pike, the Lords of the Iron Islands. Another great seafaring house. Though whilst House Valerian sailed to make lawful profits, House Greyjoy makes unlawful profits through raiding and reaving. To Lucerys of House Valerian. Master of Driftmark. Lord of the Tides. Master of Ships. Lord Valerian, my letter may come as a surprise, but I would wish for our two houses to work together. I am well aware that my house and my country are not looked kindly upon by the nobles and small folk of the mainland. But I wish to change that and for my people to make lawful fortunes and provide for the Iron Islands. As you read this, my son and heir, Harlon, sails to Driftmark to meet with you in person, that a trading agreement might be made. I had thought to have this brought before the king himself, but I instead chose to bring this before you before it is brought for the king. I shall eagerly await news on your reply from you and from Harlon, Lord Valerian, Quayan of House Greyjoy, Lord Reaper of Pike, Lord of the Iron Islands, son of the Sea Wind. Harlon 4. Harlon climbed off of the merchant ship, the Adventure, and set his feet on Driftmark's quay. He looked around and nodded when he saw the welcoming reception. Before him stood two young men, clearly noblemen from how they dressed, and with silver-gold Valyrian hair and darkened sun-kissed skin. One is Montford Valerian. The other is his bastard brother. Harlon walked towards the two, whom had a party of Valerian soldiers behind them. He looked admiringly at the soldiers. The armor they wore was strong and beautifully made, clearly expensive in its design. Ironborn would gladly pay the iron price to fight the men of Driftmark just to get their hands on pieces of household armor of Valerian fighting men. Lord Harlon of House Greyjoy, welcome to Driftmark. I am Montford of House Valerian and heir to Driftmark. This is my brother, Captain Oren Waters of House Valerian, said the older of the two. The one whom looked more like a lord than a man of the sea, whilst the other was clearly a man of the sea and was far better looking than his brother. Both men looked the same ages as Oregon and Aaron respectively, Harlon thought. My thanks, Lord Montford, said Harlon before he shook hands with both the heir to Driftmark and with his bastard brother. If you will come with me, my lord, we will take you home to Castle Driftmark, said Sir Montford. Let us not delay, Harlon agreed before following them to some horses. Riding from Seahorse Harbour, Harlon rode with the sons of Lucerys Valerian. For ever since his last letter to father, he received another before he was to depart from Harrenhal and return for home. He had left without his companions and rode for Duskendale before booking a merchant vessel to take him to Driftmark. As they rode, Harlon thought of the stories father had told him as a boy. This would have been Dalton Greyjoy's dream. To have sailed to Driftmark and to conquer it. That, the Arbor and the Shield Islands. But I am no conqueror. Though I am Ironborn, I want to make a better life for folk of the Iron Islands. A life that doesn't involve endless raiding and fighting. For all the glorious stories and tales they tell of the Red Kraken, they tell that had his salt wife not slit his throat and thrown herself from the cliffs of Fair Isle, he would have continued to raid and plunder across all of West Eos. He might have conquered the Shield Islands, Driftmark, Crab Isle, Dragonstone and perhaps even the Arbor. But he never would have realistically held on to them. He cared only for paying the iron price, fighting, killing and forcing himself on salt wives enough until he got bored of them. He was no king in the making. They arrived at Castle Driftmark. Following Lord Valerian's heir, Harlon walked from the courtyard to the castle itself. He looked around with admiration of the seat of the seafaring house of the Crown Lands, if not all of the mainland. He admired how the great castle had been built. As beautiful as this castle and this island are, neither could ever be home. Pike will always be home. Where I first learned to fight, to sail, to lead, and to be lord of the Iron Islands, in times of peace and times of war. Every kingdom of the mainland has one. A great and seafaring house. The Crown Lands has the Valerius. The Westerlands has the Farmans. The Reach has the Red Wines. Dawn has the Tolans. The Stormlands has the Estermonts. The Vale has the Graftons. The Riverlands has the Malisters. And the North has the Mandaelis. Harlon entered the solar of the Master of Driftmark. A middle-aged man was the Lord of the Tides. Balding with a faint head of silver-gold Valyrian hair, he looked like combination of both his sons, Harlon noticed. For he looked like both a sailor and a lord. Lord Harlon, welcome to Driftmark, he said before offering his hand. Harlon shook his hand and sat down when offered. Your Lord Father spoke of your hopes of fostering greater ties with the mainland, but did not specify what exactly, said the Valerian of Driftmark. Harlon cleared his throat. Lord Valerian, what my Lord Father hopes to do is to build trading posts. Trading posts, he asked. Harlon wondered what would be the best way to approach this without offending him in the way he usually spoke. The Iron Islands is a desolate place, as you well know, Lord Valerian. We have no fertile farmlands nor bountiful mines providing gold and silver. What my father hopes to do is to change that by building trading posts across the 7 kingdoms, answering to Pike, From there, we might easily exchange resources whilst captains sailing from abroad bringing goods from foreign lands can exchange them or even have them sold to patrons on the mainland, to provide coin. All to strike a profit and provide for the Iron Islands, the Valerian added, understanding his meaning. Exactly, Harlon replied. He nodded as he thought about this. So, both you and Lord Quayan hope to change things for the Iron Islands, he asked. Whilst many of my people grow up dreaming to be great seafaring raiders such as Dalton Greyjoy, I have no such wish. For I have seen just how strong a united Westeros is. And most of all, I do not wish for there to be a repeat of when Johanna Lannister invaded the Iron Islands after the Dance of the Dragons and dealt devastating damage to my country and my people. And you believe your efforts can change this? I do, Lord Valerian. Notes. Their meeting was successful, but will all that happens after it be the same? Chapter 39, The Gonfalonia. Summary. Vargid continues to a part of lies and politics at the behest of Valerys. And the latter receives a visit from a foreign visitor, who presents an offer too good to refuse. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Vargid 4. Valerys' next step, Vargid thought as he walked with Valerys in the great council chambers. All of the magisters of lies were gathered for the swearing in of numerous positions of government to magisters. All positions, from High Admiral, High Judge, High Justiciar, High Banker and of course, the Gonfalonia. Vargid walked beside his good father through the decadently decorated manse that was the great council chambers. Valerys told me a great deal about how they built this place when Valerians built Lies the Lovely. A home away from home. That home that was the great empire of old Valyria. And yet these fools, high and mighty Valerians of Lies, think themselves descendants of those dragon-riding Valerians that did think themselves above all others. Their arrogance led them to annihilate the likes of the Rhoynar and the Giscari. Only for their arrogance to be answered when the 14 flames of Valyria burned. These fools are not like Valerians of old. As much as they may wish it. Those Valerians were warriors, dragon riders, practitioners of all kinds of magic and builders. They whom built great castles and kingdoms from nothing. But the milords of Lies. They are far from this. Their ancestors would spit and laugh at them for daring to call themselves Valerian. For they are too weak and lacking in strength. Not one of them would take up arms to defend Lies if it came under attack. They would rely too much on coin to hire sellswords to kill for them. What are you thinking? Vargid turned to Valerys. That for all the noble talk of how great the Valerians of old were, I think that the ancestors of the Valerians of Lies would belittle them for accomplishing nothing like they had once accomplished, Vargid replied. Valerys smiled at that. That is exactly my point, Vargid. The Free Cities has grown too decadent. The ones with any power are the Volantens and Braavosi. But the Volantens have grown weak because of infighting between the elephants and tigers. And as for the Braavosi, their incursions on the Pentoshes have made them strong. But they have no great connection to Valyria. They are a colony of former slaves whom built a home for themselves. An admirable feat, and yet the legacy of the Valyrians of old is that their descendants have grown too complacent. That is what I intend to change. For Lies, for the Free Cities. And perhaps more, he said. Valerys has many great ambitions. And he has the capability to bring these ambitions to fruitions. And as always, I will be by his side. As I once was, as a sellsword. But now as his goodson. All rise for his excellency, the first magister of Lies. Vargid looked at all the magisters whom stood from their thrones in the conclave. Whilst the consul stood in the center of the conclave, as arbiter and voice for the magisters when bringing something forth for the first magister and the same the other way around. Valerys took his seat on the throne of the first magister, whilst Vargid stood by his side. Before we begin, I would like to express how soundly I sleep at night, knowing that we have a first magister whom knows what is expected of his position. And that he won't use this as a chance to enrich his family or his friends. Vargid glanced at the man whom spake. Adrio Pendaeris. Speaking before Valerys has spoken. What the fuck are you thinking? Vargid gulped. But Valerys kept a friendly smile. I am glad that you get a good night's sleep, Pendaeris, he stated. Vargid smirked as he crossed his arms and looked around at Pendaeris and his ilk, whilst many others in the conclave chuckled at Valerie's jape. Now, I would like to begin today's session with an important agenda. What is it, you may wonder? It is to improve the state of Lies the Lovely. Lies is a city that was once the envy of the free cities. For it is this city that is the most pure of all cities of old Valeria's colonies in western Essos. And today, what have we to show for this legacy? He stood and gestured with his hands to allow the conclave to speak. None did. There was muttering amongst themselves. But none would speak. Or talk of what they had achieved. That is because we have become complacent. We have turned from a colony of great Valerians into a city of merchants. Indeed, many amongst us here are merchant princes. Merchant princes whom have become so wealthy, that they can barely rise from their chairs. Vargid chuckled whilst the conclave laughed at this jape, at the expense of many of Valerie's own supporters, whom also laughed. But we deserve more than this. Our children, grandchildren and descendants deserve better than this. And this is why we must rise. Rise to what heights, Your Excellency? Asked Malar Orthiz. To the extent that never again must we rely on sellswords to do our fighting for us. Whether against Dothraki, pirates or rival free cities in our most righteous cause for the disputed lands Valeries proclaimed. Many clapped and cheered at that. And it is with this in mind, that, as First Magister, I would appoint the necessary positions to see my agendas through. The first of said positions, is of course, the title of Gonfalonier of Lies. Vargid inhaled and exhaled at that. Vargid walked to Valerie's side in front of the assembled conclave. This is it. I knew that I would be rich ever since I accepted Valerie's coin. But never did I think I would rise to be this high. To be the Gonfalonier of Lies itself. Valerie's turned to face the conclave. My fellow magisters, Vargid Mariner, though a sellsword of Volantis, has proven himself exceptionally well, as both a warrior and as a general in service to Lies the Lovely for these past 10 years. It is with this in mind, that I would appoint him Gonfalonier. Do I hear any objections? Though it was a seemingly calm and innocent question, Vargid knew well enough that he could hear the challenge in Valerie's voice. But as he looked around the conclave, he smirked at seeing no opposition to Valerie's appointment. Very good, he spake before he turned to Vargid. He gestured to the consul, whom walked to his side, holding a pin of a sword over a naked and dancing lady, the symbol of Lies the Lovely, for it was an image of the goddess Pantra. Which meant little to Vargid, whom once held faith to the Arhola before he became a sellsword. Now he kept his faith in his sword and his skill. He passed the pin to Valerie's. Valerie's held the pin up whilst Vargid recited the oath from a scroll presented to him by the consul. I, Vargid Mariner of Volantis, do swear allegiance to the free city of Lies the Lovely. I swear to lift my sword in its defense against all enemies that would dare to assail with arms, whether in force or intrigue. This I swear until my last dying day. Valerie's smiled. And so, we are complete. With a staunch and capable defender of the city, he announced before presenting the badge of office to Vargid. Vargid bowed his head to Valerie's and took the badge and pinned it to his jerkin. Interlude 2. Ben Kingsley, Photo Prince of Persia, Las Arenas del Tiempo /14-23. Valerie's del Tala, Ben Kingsley. Sat in his solar, Valerie's nodded as he read the reports from his spies in the rivaling free cities of Myr and Tioche. The Archon of Tioche was said to be dying from the bloody flux. And the first magister of Myr was vacant after the previous incumbent had been ousted from his post following an attack by the Stepstones pirates on Myr's port. Myr and Tioche. The governments will elect new officials for leadership. Which shall be to my benefit. I will need to find out whom are the best options. Valerie's looked up at an old map of the free cities, from over a century ago. He smiled when he saw the Triarchy on it. Stood against the 7 kingdoms of West Eos as a rival for hegemony, its power was unquestionable. Until bureaucracy and corruption took hold, destroying all it had accomplished. But Valerie's would not let that happen again. I have waited a lifetime to make this happen. And I will achieve it. For Lies to resurrect the Triarchy. And to become the greatest power of the free cities. Valerie smiled as he finished reading the correspondence from his spies in Myr and Tioche. His steps to ensure that the future governments of both Lie's rivals would gradually warm to Lie's and most of all, to him, would soon begin. And when they did, he would pounce like a tiger on the opportunity. Valerie's attention was drawn to the door when he heard a knock. "Enter," he commanded with a smile. With nothing but good news of successful results in his endeavors, Valerie's mood was elated as Bacietos entered his solar. He bowed his head. "Apologies, Exo. Lord Wiman Mandaeli of White Harbor is here for his appointment." "Escort him inside," Valerie's replied. Valerie's put aside a few scrolls on his desk and drank water from his cup as he heard the hobbling and heavy footsteps of whom could only be a largely overweight man. Behind Bacietos was indeed a very fat man. His hair was grey and receding. And his fingers were as large as sausages. He looked as though he possessed 3 chins from underneath all his weight. But Valerie's paid no attention to his weight. He had grown up amongst the magisters of Lies for too long to underestimate men solely because of how fat they were. Indeed, father once told him that he saw a man's fat as a sign of his success in life. Valerie's, instead, focused on his eyes, which he felt told a lot about a man. And he saw that he was right. This was a cunning man, he saw. His eyes were sharp and aimed squarely at Valerie's. Occasionally they darted around the solar and at the desk, but mostly they were focused on Valerie's. "Lord Wiman of House Mandaeli of the North, Exo." "Thank you, Bacietos. Now, do fetch our guest some wine." "A drink, Lord Mandaeli?" asked Valerie's. "Indeed, Your Excellency. I should like some of your finest Liesen wine," he said. As Bacietos left with a nod, Valerie's faced Wiman Mandaeli. "Liesen wine. I am glad that you would sample our wines, Lord Mandaeli, but surely something such as Carhold Bronze or Uber Gold would be more to your liking," he asked politely. "This is true, Your Excellency. And yet, from my early days as both a knight and as a sailor, I do appreciate the chance to sample local foods and wines from whence I travel abroad," he said with a jovial smile. "A fair point. Now, how might I be of service to the Lord of White Harbor?" he asked. "I come on behalf of my liege lord, Lord Ricard of House Stark, Your Excellency." "Indeed. Lord Stark. And what does Lord Stark wish of the free city of Lies?" Valerie's asked, intrigued by what this could be. He knew well of Ricard Stark and his project of building a great canal. It was an ambition he was impressed by. "You are aware of the Kalin Canal which he builds in the north, Your Excellency?" "I am. It is an incredible project and one which shows merit and promise," he replied honestly. "Quite so, Your Excellency. However, Lord Stark is frustrated with the speed of construction of this great wonder. And he asks for Liesen resources and help in building the canal." "Interesting. Very interesting. This could be very beneficial. And gain an ally in Westeros. For the time being, at least." "What sort of resources does he ask for?" "The kind that Lies would have access to. Such as innovations and inventions from far across the world that would speed the construction of this great canal. In exchange for a discounted use of the canal, once it is constructed, Lord Stark would offer a discounted trade between the North and the free city of Lies." Now Valerie's was intrigued by what the North could offer. "And what trade would the North entail?" asked Valerie's. Before he could answer, Bacietos returned with a full bottle of the very finest Liesen white wine. Wiman Mandaeli gratefully drank a cup of the wine before he answered. "The finest northern iron, steel and ironwood, the finest wood in the world, as opposed to what the Summer Islanders would have you think, Your Excellency." Valerie's nodded with a smile at that. It was true that there was a lack in mines producing metals and forests which grew trees and strong woods in Lies lands. The same was said of all the free cities. This could indeed be very beneficial. A poor Westerosi kingdom builds the very thing which it needs to become very wealthy and powerful indeed, and with our help. And in exchange for a discounted use of it, we gain their resources. Which will be of enormous benefit. A benefit that our Mirish and Tiroshi neighbors will become nervous about. Well, Lord Mandaeli. I think we can safely say that we have an understanding, said Valerie's as Bacietos poured him a cup. He poured another cup for Wiman Mandaeli. They toasted to their agreement before Bacietos left to produce more parchment to write a formal document. Ricard Stark may well have just provided the swiftest method to achieving my dream. all for the price of helping build his canal. This day is becoming better and better. Notes. Vargid continues to rise up in the world. And Valeries makes a deal with the North that shall ultimately speed his plans quicker than he had expected. Chapter 40, The Old Kraken. Summary. Lucerys learns of the tourney at Harrenhal and its aftermath, whilst Quarian Greyjoy plans for the future. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Lucerys 3. Lucerys was sat in the small council. The first time in which the small council was being held since Aerys' return from Harrenhal and the great tourney held there. Lucerys had heard many of the stories at Driftmark and at King's Landing upon his return to the Red Keep. When he had heard that Aerys had left on his advice, he couldn't believe it. For in the 3 years since the defiance of Duskendale, never had Aerys set foot outside of the capital. The fact that he had left had been on the tongues of many. Lucerys feared that he might have targeted Rhaegar. But other than the fact that he had lost a joust to Baelor Hightower, who then crowned Princess Elia as his Queen of Love and Beauty, nothing dangerous happened at Harrenhal. And though the topic was a scandal, Lucerys had found out from his own spies, not amongst the king's servants, but from Devan Massey, the squire to Gerald Hightower, that the king found the situation hilarious and was not concerned by it whatsoever. Lucerys was glad. For he feared that House Targaryen and the realm would endure further divisions from his mere attendance of the tourney. But now, he wondered what might happen. Upon Aerys' return, he feared what the realm would think of him. Now that there was no chance in which the mass of nobility gathered at Harrenhal wouldn't have seen Aerys in the flesh. Sat down in the small council, Aerys turned to him as the others were all sat down. "I gather that you negotiated a trading deal with the heir to the Iron Islands," Lucerys said. Aerys. "Indeed, Your Grace." Lord Harlon's visit came as a surprise. Though a pleasant one in the end, Lucerys replied. His eyes darted at that. "Pleasant? Why is that?" "Harlon Greyjoy struck me as being far from the Ironborn reavers of old. I saw for myself that he is a man who wishes to change the seafaring ways of the Iron Islands from that of reaving and plunder to that of trading and lawfully earned gains," my King Lucerys explained. Aerys hummed as he rested his back against his chair. Before he finally nodded. "He struck me as the same, Lucerys, when I met him in Harrenhal. Besides the Dornish, the Iron Islands have always been an enemy to the Dragon's rule of law. With the likes of Dalton Greyjoy and Dagon Greyjoy being prime examples. Do you think that Quarian Greyjoy and Harlon Greyjoy are the exceptions? That they can change this?" "I do, Your Grace. And I should like to pursue this. But with your permission, of course," said Lucerys. The king narrowed his eyes at him once again. But then his lips curled into a pleasant smile. "Of course, Lucerys. Implement how best you see fit. And let me know all the agreements made with Quarian Greyjoy and how best they can serve their king, as well as making lawful profits that do not involve the murders of my people or the looting of their properties." "Yes, Your Grace." Aerys turned to the rest of the small council, who looked relieved to have been granted a respite when he had focused his attention on Lucerys. "Now, what news is there from across the realm since the ending of the tourney at Harrenhal?" asked Aerys. He turned to Varys. The spider cleared his throat before he spoke. "Your Grace, Hoster Tully hosts a feast in Riverrun, celebrating the confirmation that his daughters shall wed Brandon Stark and Lysa Arryn once the latter is of age," he said. He hummed before gesturing him to continue. "Tywin Lannister is reportedly furious over his son, Sir Jaime, joining the Kingsguard." The king smirked victoriously at that. Before whispering something only he could hear. "Jon Arryn continues to host Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark in the Eyrie as his wards until they both come of age, and Lord Baratheon shall wed the Lady Lyanna Stark." Aerys hummed once again before he narrowed his eyes. "Speaking of the Starks, what news is there of Rickard Stark's project, this Kaelin Canal?" he asked. "The canal nears completion, from what my birds have sung," Your Grace, Varys replied before Pycelle spoke. "Your Grace, a raven came from Rickard Stark recently." He turned his fiery gaze to Pycelle. "What does it say?" he demanded. Pycelle broke the seal and passed it to Aerys. Aerys read the letter before putting it down. "He asks for royal consent to restore both Moat Cailin and Wolf's Den in the north and award them both to his spare sons, Eddard and Benjen," he announced. "Doing this will make the north more powerful," Your Grace, said Simon stupidly. Shut up, you fool. You forget, Lord Staunton, that never have the Starks of Winterfell or their kingdom ever been treacherous to House Targaryen since Torrhen Stark bent the knee many years ago, Lucerys added, hoping to be diplomatic and for an innocent noble family to not be on the receiving end of their ire. For as Rollo had wanted of him, he did not want Aerys to start a war with mad actions that caused the deaths of thousands. What say you, Lord Commander? Do you think they would not dare to betray their king? Asked the king. The Starks, Your Grace. Rickard Stark cannot have achieved what he has without his bastard Maester. He is as dull as a practice sword. He is no threat to you or to House Targaryen's rule, said Gerald Hightower. Honest as always, Lord Commander. I am glad I can rely on you to be truthful to me. I but do my sworn duty to my king, Your Grace, he replied earnestly. Interlude 3. Vikings, TV series 2013-2020, Ray Stevenson as other, IMDb. Quayan Greyjoy, Ray Stevenson. Quayan looked out on the training yard from the balcony, holding Melissa's hand as he did so. He smiled as he watched his youngest sons, Aragon, Aeron and Robin, and his grandchildren Theon and Asher training under direction from Dagmar Clefture and two of Quayan's eldest sons, Donell, Quinton and Victorian. Perhaps it would be best if Asher was to be taught to be a lady rather than taught to be a warrior and a ship's captain, my love. Quayan turned with a frown to his third wife. Melissa was a sweet little thing when they first wed. But years living on the Iron Islands had changed all of that. She yearned for her home in the Riverlands. But the only thing which stopped her, Quayan found, was her marriage to him, and Robin still there. She's not my daughter. She's my granddaughter. Harlon is her father, and it is his responsibility as her father to teach her what he deems necessary, Quayan replied, a fact he felt strongly about. But it isn't right, for so sweet a girl to be raised to kill and sail, Melissa insisted. Perhaps not. But she is his daughter. And whether it is right or wrong, it is Harlon's responsibility to teach her what he thinks is right, Quayan explained. Harlon doesn't want his own daughter to be a whore or a salt wife for another man. And he's right. Our words are we do not so, and no Greyjoy girl should ever be a whore for men. Robin has become a strong warrior, he noted, hoping to distract her. Melissa forgot all of Asher and turned her gaze to her only son. She beamed down at him as she looked at him with pride. Robin sparred with both Victorian, Donell and the Clefture at the same time, with axe and shield. Only recently turning to 3 and 10, and the boy was learning fast, Quayan was proud to see. It is good that he can hold his own against them, Quayan said. Yes. I could never bear it if he was raised as you were, Quayan, she whispered. Quayan grimaced as she held his hand as they looked over the railing at Quayan's sons and grandchildren. Suddenly, he was no longer looking down at his sons and grandchildren with pride. Instead, he was back aboard Grandfather Dagon's ship, the Kraken's Wrath, rowing at 4, being beaten by other reavers, under Grandfather Dagon's command to harden him. Then at 7, 5 prisoners were brought before him, and Grandfather Dagon gave him an axe to kill all with. Quayan finally said with a nod. He smiled when he saw Robin strike down the Clefture's shield before Donell swung his large great sword down onto Robin's shield. The blow sent Robin down onto the ground, though he still held up his shield. Melissa gasped at seeing Robin on the ground. Robin rolled out of the way of Donell's great sword. He stood back up and bashed his shield across at Donell's chest. Donell laughed before he kicked at Robin's shield. Robin swung both axe and shield at Donell's great sword. Donell skillfully blocked each blow before Robin allowed him to thrust at him. But Robin swung his shield at Donell's face. Melissa yelped at seeing Donell bleed from Robin's blow before he turned to face Victorian, who had just easily defeated both Aragon and Aeron with ease. Quayan, meanwhile, nodded with approval as he watched his youngest son charge at the most skilled fighter of his sons. Victorian, wielding a huge axe, swung it across at Robin's shield. He disarmed Robin of his shield. Robin roared as he charged at Victorian. But Victorian parried the axe aside easily before bashing the blade of his axe against his chest. Robin fell to his knees, gasping for breath and panting. Dagmar called an end to the spar. You fought well, little Kraken. Well done, said the Clefture before patting Robin's back and helping him stand back up. Melissa inhaled and exhaled deeply as they walked downstairs together to the training yard, where the cleft jaw rewarded Robin's fortitude with his wineskin. He's too young to drink, Melissa insisted when she saw Robin take the wineskin. At 3 and 10. When I was that age, I was already a ship's first mate, killing, having my first few women and getting drunk, Quentin commented with a grin as he congratulated Theon and Asher for fighting. It's your choice, Robin. You are man enough to have a drink. But don't let your brothers or your mother make your choice for you. You are a Greyjoy. What are the words of our house? We do not so, father, he said proudly. We do not follow the commands we do not want to follow. We do what we feel is right. So, drink if you wish to. But don't if you think you aren't ready. Robin considered this, whilst under his mother's watchful eye. She looked at him pleadingly, as if keen for him to not drink. But Robin uncorked the wineskin and had a small sip of the contents. Good lad, Dagmar said with a wicked grin and wink before patting his shoulder and taking his wineskin back. It won't make him ill. It is only a small sip, Quayan said reassuringly to Melissa. My Lord Greyjoy. Quayan turned around with Melissa. They saw Maester Cullen walking to them. My lord, Lord Harlon returns, he said. Excellent. Now with the Valerius on side, we may have a chance to save the Iron Islands from the ignorance which our own ancestors put down on us. But it is an ignorance which Balon and Euron both gladly embrace, Quayan thought with disappointment. Harlon entered the training yard with a grin. He beamed proudly as he looked at Theon and Asher. He took a knee and laughed as he hugged them both. You both been learning from Uncle Quentin. Aye, father, they said proudly. Aye. Well done, he said before embracing them again. Harlon, come, said Quayan. Harlon walked with Quayan whilst Maester Cullen left with Oregon, Aaron, Robin, Theon and Asher, though Melissa accompanied Robin, asking him repeatedly if he was all right. She frets too much over Robin. He is a Greyjoy. He is no milksop or weak mainlander. I received your letter. So, the Valerius are all right with us building trading posts? Quayan asked. Only a limited few. In certain places. Though he said that the small council cannot enforce the Lords Paramount to allow us to build these trading posts. We will have to speak with them personally, Harlon replied. Quayan hummed and nodded. Not a problem. Yourself, Roderick and I shall sail out to meet various Lords Paramount. Perhaps the Martells, Starks and Tullys for now. Then we make certain arrangements for trade and send our more civilized captains out to sea across to Essos and bring back trade goods. Notes. As the small council, barring Lucerys and Drold Hightower, try to make anyone but themselves a traitor to an easily riled Aes, Quayan observes his youngest sons and his grandchildren fight. And his plans for integrating the Iron Islands with the mainland come to a head with Harlon's return from Driftmark. Chapter 41, The Dragon Stirs. Summary. Whilst Ned and Ashura get used to married life in the Eyrie, in the capital Aes paranoia gets the better of him when he hears news from abroad. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Eddard 8. Eddard stood facing Robert. In the training yard, John, Albert, Kyle, Jon and Ash all sat down to watch the duel take place. Sir Hubert watched the two as Eddard took up his great sword and Robert took his warhammer. Whilst Eddard was dressed in chainmail and boiled leathers, Robert was dressed in chainmail and steel plate. Sir Hubert nodded and roared, "Begin." Robert grunted as he swung across at Eddard's greatsword. Eddard blocked it by holding the grip with his right hand and the point with his left hand. He panted as the hammer contacted with his sword. Eddard swiveled around, allowed his sword to escape the grasp of Robert's enormous and powerful warhammer. He thrusted at Robert, who blocked it with the pommel of his hammer's grip. Robert responded with an overhead swing onto Eddard, who swiftly avoided it. Eddard panted as he took a few steps forward. In reply, Eddard sliced his sword across at Robert's breastplate. But Robert had taken a quick step back, avoiding the point of Eddard's sword. Robert roared as he swung his hammer down on Eddard. He blocked it and swung his sword at the hammer before he could attack again. Robert pushed the sword away with his hammer before he thrusted it at Eddard and swung across at Eddard. Eddard's sword was caught in the grip of Robert's warhammer as Robert pulled him towards him. Eddard, tired and weary, broke his sword free and roared as he sliced his sword down on Robert's pauldron. As the pauldron collapsed from Robert's cuirass, Robert has bashed the pommel of his warhammer onto Eddard's back. Both friends fell on their knees, exhausted and injured. "Draw," Sir Hubert called. Eddard smiled as he looked up at Robert. Robert burst out laughing before reaching out and shaking Eddard's hand. He stood up first before he helped up Eddard. "Being married to a Dane has improved your skill to no end, Ned." Robert boomed as Eddard stood straight, still panting and instinctively reaching for his back. "Need you to see the Maester?" Jon asked with concern as their friends all joined them, and Ash ran to Eddard's side. "I'm fine, Jon," Eddard said assuringly. "As am I." More surprised than anything by Ned's skill, Robert added. "You talk as though Ned was not always this good, Robert," Elbereth said disapprovingly. Eddard was helped out of his armor by Elbereth's good squire, Joffrey Crane. "Are you all right?" Ash asked gently. I am," said Eddard as he held her hands. She beamed before proudly kissing him and wrapping her arms around him. Eddard walked with Ash to the godswood of the Uri. "I often come here, or to any godswood," Eddard told her. "To pray?" she asked. "Not just that. But also, to just enjoy the peace and quiet." Which certainly came in useful whenever Jon was hosting a feast and both Robert and Elbereth were drunk, Eddard explained. She held both his hands. "And you want to escape from your own wife into the godswood?" she asked accusingly. "No, never, Ash." But Ash just burst out laughing. "I am sorry, Ned, but I do love to tease you," she said before she leant in and kissed him. "I can think of no better thing than kissing Ash and just being with her," Eddard thought as he hugged her. "Lord Eddard. Lady Ashura." Both turned to see Maester Coleman joining them in the godswood. "Is all well, Coleman?" asked Eddard. "I would hope so, my lord. This letter just came for you, from Winterfell." "Winterfell? I hope father isn't upset about Ash and I marrying." Eddard thanked him for the letter and sat with Ash on a nearby bench whilst Coleman left. He broke the seal and opened the letter and began to read it with her. "Eddard. I was very surprised when I heard your news from Brandon, Lyanna and Benjen. Of all the women you would wed, I never would have thought you would marry a Dornish woman. But, regardless, so long as you are happy with her, then I am happy also. Now that my project, the canal across the neck which I have named the Kaelin Canal, is coming close to completion. And with it, the dawn of a new age for the north, in which we shall prosper greater than we have ever done so before. I have sent word to the king that it nears completion and for formal permission to restore both Moat Cailin and Wolf's Den. Upon the completion of their restoration, I shall name you as Lord of Moat Cailin and Benjen as Lord of Wolf's Den. Yours sincerely, Father. Lord of Moat Cailin. That would be interesting, Ash said as she held his hand. Moat Cailin acts as a gateway between the north and the Riverlands. And would be at the center of Father's project, the Kaelin Canal, said Eddard. So, for all your proposal of a married life without lands or riches, they were all wrong, Ned, Ash said. Do you complain? Asked Eddard. Not at all. I am glad that your father sees the sense in restoring these ruined castles and building anew. I think it is a brilliant approach, and will give homes for more people across the realm and bring employment to thousands of small folk who struggle to make ends meet for their families, she said. You speak as though you know this very well, wondered Eddard. I do. As Elia's lady-in-waiting, I saw plenty of this. In Dragonstone and in King's Landing. With Elia's patronage, we had built numerous orphanages, taverns, merchants' stores, blacksmiths and tailors across King's Landing and Dragonstone. It really made an enormous difference to see small folk who were able to provide coin for their families. Interlude 4. Anthony Stewart Head fans on Instagram, smiling face with heart-shaped eyes, smiling face with heart-shaped eyes. #Anthony Head, #Anthony Stewart Head, #Arthur Pendragon, #Merlin, #Merline Anthony Head, Anthony, handsome men. Drold Hightower, Anthony Head. In the name of honor and duty, fight, protect and defend the king and the royal family from all threats, big or small. This was the code in which Drold lived by. Since the days he was knighted by Sir Duncan the Tall, the then Lord Commander, Drold strove to defend the king and the royal family. He had been only a few years older than the newest addition to the sworn brotherhood of the Kingsguard, when he had become Lord Commander. After the death of Sir Duncan the Tall at Summerhall, he had become Lord Commander, at a time when he was only one of two remaining Kingsguard in the aftermath of the great tragedy which had befallen Summerhall and Great House Targaryen. Now, at the age of 56, he felt his better years were long gone. Though he was near twice as old as the king, he would never let old age defeat him. He could still lift his sword. He could still wear his armor without discomfort. He would still be a Kingsguard until the day he died. The White Bull, they called him. When he younger, there were few as strong or as skilled with a sword than he. Drold earned that name with pride in the War of the Ninepenny Kings, when he avenged the killing of brave Lord Ormond Baratheon, and watched as his future sworn brother, Sir Barristan slay the dreaded Maelys the Monstrous. The one aspect which Drold disliked about being Lord Commander of the Kingsguard was his place kept on the small council. He was a knight, not a player of the befooled Game of Thrones. His skill was with his lance, sword and shield, not with counting coins, issuing edicts or trying to tell his grace what he wanted to hear, not what he needed to hear. Drold took his place in the small council. He sat down, taking care not to damage his beloved white cloak as he sat down. Drold adored his white cloak. He had taken great care of it since the day he was awarded it by Sir Duncan. He watched as the rest of the small council arrived. He grimaced as he saw the Lickspittles, Pycelle, Staunton, Chelstead and Merryweather. Varys, he knew was a man of mystery, and yet was so skilled at his profession, that no threat to the king remained hidden from him. And then there was Valerian, a loyal, wise and capable man and not a Lickspittle, for which he held Drold's respect. At last, the king arrived. Drold was the first to stand up and bow to him as he took his first few steps inside the small council chambers, shadowed by Sir Jaime and Sir Jonnet Hoare. "Your Grace," he greeted. "Lord Commander." "My lords." "Do sit down," the king said pleasantly. Whilst the others all sat down before the king sat down, Drold only sat down once the king was sat down. Once he was sat down, as well as Drold sitting down, his sworn brothers stepped outside to guard the doors. He turned to the king, wondering what he would choose to focus on now. "What news, my lords, of any threats to the Iron Throne's authority?" "Lord Varys," asked the king. Drold turned to the spider, who hummed before he drew a parchment from his exotic and perfumed liaison robes. "Your Grace, a song reached me this morning from my little birds. Not here in the Seven Kingdoms though." "Well, where then?" asked the king. "From lies, my king." "Lies? And why should they be of concern or threat to the king?" asked Lord Merryweather. "I would not deign to interpret this as a threat, Lord Merryweather. However, I might deem to call this more of a development." "A development? A development of what, Lord Varys?" asked Lord Valerian. Varys turned to the king in reply. "My king, do you recall how Lord Stark still builds a canal that connects Blazewater Bay to the White Knife River?" "Yes, I do." "Why?" asked the king. Drold shivered when his eyes narrowed, as though on the cusp of a grand discovery of treason. Under his command, Lord Wyman of House Marndale of White Harbour sailed to Lies. There he met the newly elected First Magister, Valerys Daltala. And together, they made a trading deal. In exchange for northern resources, such as iron, steel and ironwood, the Lysons are now providing additional means with which to better construct the Cailin Canal, said Varys. "Though this deal may seem innocent enough, I don't think that the king will take this lightly. All trading deals with foreign nations are made through the Iron Throne. And the king gets excited when he thinks he has caught treasonous wrongdoings from his own subjects." "Treason," the king muttered. Drold gulped at what the king said. And what this could mean for the security of the realm. He was glad that he was not the only one whom thought the same as him. For he noticed how Lord Valerian cleared his throat. "Your Grace, though the Lord Stark did act without royal consent or permission to make any such deals with the free city of Lies, I am certain that he did not do so to offend you," said Lord Valerian. "I agree with the Master of Ships," my king added Drold nervously. "You do? And why is that, Lord Commander?" snarled the king. "Your Grace, Lord Stark is hardly a threat to your person or to the security of the Seven Kingdoms. He barely has 20,000 men under his command. He has no war fleet. The combined forces of Old Town, the Arbor and Driftmark alone could undo the North. Stark is no danger to the Seven Kingdoms. He exhaled a breath he did not know he was holding in when he saw the king nod in consideration and purse his lips in thought. The Lord Commander may speak true, your grace. And yet, we must consider what this would mean for the realm. For this is an act of treason. A light treason perhaps. But all it takes is a small and light treason such as this to go unanswered for all other future treasons to be acted out stupidly, said the hand of the king. Gerald shivered when he saw how the king reacted. He raised a brow at Chelstead's small speech for the king to consider. And now he fiddled with his long and growing beard. Not another Duskendale. We cannot have another Duskendale. Notes. Now Aerys thinks that the Starks are his enemies because they made a trade deal without asking for permission beforehand or even just telling him in advance. And most of Aerys' small council aren't exactly helping. Chapter 42, Two Krakens Bite the Dust. Summary. Tragedy strikes in Pike. Whilst in lies, Vargid questions Valerie's. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Harlon v. Sat down in the great hall. Harlon drank with Quentin, Donell, Victorian, Aragon, Aaron and now Robin. Whilst father was talking with both Balon and Euron at the high table, and with Melissa sat by his side. As usual, Melissa shivered when under the frightful gaze of Euron's smiling eye. Harlon glared up at Balon and Euron. Still trying to entice father with your talks of the old way. You both should have come with me to Harrenhal. In fact, all of you should have. Then you would have seen the nobility gathered there. And then you would understand that for every lord of a noble house on the mainland, there is between 1,000 to 5,000 fighting men. As the eldest son and heir of Quayen Greyjoy, Harlon felt it was his duty to show his brothers that they had to follow the new way. And he had succeeded, with Quentin and Donell, both of whom had sailed with Harlon and father, fighting pirates in the Stepstones and in the Basilisk Isles. Victorian, though a dullard, was a dutiful man, and never shied from doing as he was told. Aragon and Aaron were over-eager as ever to be captains of their own ships and to earn reputations. However, Harlon thought them both to be susceptible to both he and to Balon. As for Robin, he was the youngest at 3 and 10, and who wanted to be like Harlon, which he adored him for. But Balon was a fool. He grew up reading and hearing the tales of their ancestors from as recent as great-grandfather Dagon to as far back as King Loron Greyjoy. And the fool that he was, he thought that they could outfight all kingdoms of the mainland, at sea, and conquer what lands they saw fit. "Why do they argue with father?" asked Robin. Harlon looked up at father, who angrily dismissed both Balon and Euron. "Because Balon and Euron both are idiots, brother. They think that we must follow the old way and raid and conquer," said Harlon. "And that is stupid, little brother. For if we did that, we would have to fight all kingdoms of the mainland, not for just one war, but for many wars. Until there is no Ironborn to call the Iron Islands home," Quentin added before patting Robin on the back. "What Johanna Westerling did to the Iron Islands would pale in comparison to whatever fate would be in store for us if we did as Balon and Euron wanted." Harlon looked up at his two younger brothers as they walked away from father. He scowled when he caught the black crow's eye of Euron. Euron was an enigma to Harlon. For how he could be charming and charismatic whenever he wore his patch over his black crow's eye. And yet, when he wore his patch over his blue smiling eye, that was when he did things that made Harlon nervous. He knew well of the voyages he had made across the known world, aboard his ship, the Silence. All crewmen had had their tongues ripped out. And then there were the tales of what they did. Of the villages they exterminated. The cities they razed to the ground. And of all that destruction that followed in the wake of Euron's sails. He had always been a dark mystery, Harlon remembered. He remembered how he kicked his own dog from the bridge and into the water, claiming he gotten old. He remembered hearing from the cleft jaw of how he forced himself on a girl before slaughtering her entire family, even drowning her brother, a babe at his mother's breast. But Euron was cunning and quick of tongue. He escaped from all of what father would have done. And even if Harlon had both Donell and Victorian beat him, he would have escaped from any form of punishment. Harlon knew this too well. Just as he saw the looks of fear and hatred from both Aragon and Aaron whenever they glared at him. Euron must have done something to them. I know better than to ask. But what I do know is that whatever it was that he had done, that is what keeps them from siding with Balon and Euron. Harlon saw how the two frowned. Where do you go, brothers? Boomed Victorian. There is still food to eat and wine to drink, Donnell boomed. We go to dance the finger dance, brothers, said Ballon. Yes, you haven't forgotten that is what I unborn play, have you, brothers? Innocently asked Euron. Keep talking, brother. You both know who is better at the dance than other man here, Harlon boasted. Yes. And what have you to show for it, brother? Mainlander gold won from axe throwing in one of their fancy tourneys. You've forgotten whom we are. We are Ironborn. Not fucking lickspittles of the Mainlander, Spallon snapped. Keep calling me a lickspittle, little brother, and we'll see if you are full of iron and salt. Unless of course, you are full of rust and sugar, snapped Harlon as he stood up. Ballon took a step back. But still, the two left. And Harlon followed the rest of his brothers when they went to the training yard to go and watch. On the training yard, Harlon sat down and rolled his eyes as Ballon and Euron both took an axe and stood on two sides. Robin took a coin from his pocket. Head or dragon? He asked. Head, said Ballon. Dragon, said Euron. Robin threw the coin in the air. He caught it. Head, said Robin. Ballon snarled as Robin walked away. It annoyed Harlon how Ballon looked down on Robin. For no reason other than being the whelp of a Mainlander whore. And he never approved of the softer approach of both father and Harlon to raising Theon and Asher. Harlon snarled to Ballon in reply. Shitting your pants, Ballon. Harlon snapped. Ballon spat in reply before he turned to face Euron. He raised his axe in the air. But as he stretched his arm out to throw, Euron did the same. Harlon's eyes opened wide when he saw Euron about to throw his own axe. Stop! Harlon shouted. But it was too late. Both threw their axes at the other. Harlon watched as Euron collapse, with Ballon's axe embedded in his skull. And Ballon coughed and spat out blood whilst Euron's axe was buried in his chest. Robin! Get Maester Cullen! Now! Robin ran to get the Maester whilst Harlon ran to Euron's side. Just from looking at him, he saw that he was dead. Ballon's axe struck Euron's black crow's eye. Harlon turned and ran to Ballon's side. What of Euron? Victorian whispered. Dead, Harlon muttered. He noticed how both Aragorn and Aeron turned to Euron. Neither shed a tear for him. But then, they turned back to Ballon as he still coughed blood and reached for the axe buried in his chest. Would that this were in battle and I was stood on my ship, Ballon muttered before he coughed once again. Just breathe. Brother, breathe. Quentin shouted. Ballon shook his head. Just as Maester Cullen and Robin arrived, Ballon shut his trembling eyes. Harlon brought them all back whilst Maester Cullen held his ear over Ballon's heart. Save him, Maester. Aeron begged. He is with the drowned god now, Harlon muttered with a frown. It's true, my lord. It was at least quick. Vargid v. Vargid smiled as he sat by Delaera's side. Our first child, she said as the apothecary left the room. Our first child, Vargid said with a beaming smile before stroking her hand. Do you mind? Mind what? Vargid asked. If it is a son or a daughter, she asked. Vargid shook his head. Never. It will never matter to me. What matters is that we have a family of good children. Of both sons and daughters, Vargid replied. Truthfully, Vargid didn't care for children at all. He never considered himself a dutiful husband or father. And he never saw that changing. But he knew that she was Valerie's daughter and that her happiness was his happiness also. Whatever children he did have were from lust, not from love or duty. He had no illusions that when she did give birth to sons and daughters, that his mind would change from that of a warlord and to that of a loving family man. His mind was forever focused on fighting the current war and preparing for the next one. Vargid planted a gentle kiss on Delaera's forehead before taking his leave. Remember what the old man said. Be careful and take care of what you eat and drink. Any slave that gives you grief, tell me, and I'll remove their heads, Vargid said. I will, fear not, she said with a giggle. It would be a mercy. Rather than be subjected to whatever fate your father would put them through. Vargid left his manse, bored already. He had been gone Felonia of Lies for an entire moon already. And he was bored. It had been a whole year since he had taken arms against an enemy of lies. Vargid missed taking his Arak into battle. He yearned for his blade to feed on the blood and souls of the hundreds and thousands of enemies that dared to cross blades with him. He missed the feeling of sinking his blade into the enemies of lies and seeing 10 men flee for every one of their comrades they saw him cut down. He left for the Deltala manse. Arriving, he saw that Valerie's was indeed there. He knew that he would be in residence. For the guard protecting the manse was doubled whenever he was in residence. He was allowed into his solar. Vargid saw Valerie's smiling as he read a few reports from Myr and Tioche. He could tell that they were from the rival cities of lies. Because of how widely he smiled as he looked down on them. Finally, he looked up at Vargid. "Vargid, what news do you bring?" he asked. Vargid sat down opposite him. "That you will soon be a grandfather once again," he replied. Valerie's put down the parchment he was reading. "Further good news. This is excellent. Further good news. What does he mean?" "Of what do you mean?" "Ah, that my efforts in Myr and Tioche have succeeded," he replied. "Which only further your ultimate plans. Not merely to resurrect the Triarchy. Nor to turn lies into the greatest power in the free cities and rival our neighbors. But to make all enemies, from the West AOC to Slavers Bay, fear you. To become the greatest power in the world. Rivaling not merely the West AOC, but even the Golden Empire of Yeti." But what confused Vargid was his most recent act as First Magister of Lies. "When will you meet your newest counterparts?" Vargid wondered. "Soon. They shall soon come on my invitation. On the pretext of peacefully discussing the disputed lands. But all shall be resolved, once they have arrived," he explained. "And Westeos?" He turned to him with a curious glance. "Westeos? What of Westeos? In all our talks, you speak of the West AOC as though they are an enemy. And yet, now you trade with them," Vargid explained. Valerie's drummed the table with his fingers a little before he pressed them together and spake. "It is a beneficial deal. It came as a pleasant surprise, to be sure. And one in which shall serve us well in the long run. And it does shorten the time I had anticipated for things to begin," he said. "In what way?" asked Vargid. Valerie's hummed before he drank from his wine cup. He sipped it and placed it back down. "The northerners of Westeos are isolated from their southern counterparts in terms of religion, culture and geography. And their resources, such as copper, electrum, gemstones, and best of all, steel and ironwood, are of great benefit to our armies and our fleets, which I am sure you will agree." Chapter 43, Making a Promise. Summary. Robert makes a promise to someone special in his life. Whilst plans go ahead for Elbert's upcoming wedding, which shall be a dual one with Brandon and Caitlin. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Robert the Sixth. Robert knocked on the door. He held the 2 dolls in one hand as he stood before the door. It had been 3 moons since last he saw her. And the daughter that they shared. Little Maya. Hers was a modest house on the outskirts of the Uri. Nara worked as a barmaid at a nearby tavern. It was where he first had met her. Soon after being knighted for emerging victorious in a tourney celebrating John's 60th name-a-day. The door opened. She smiled when she saw him. "Hello, Robert," she said. "Good day. How are you?" Robert asked kindly. "I am well." "As is she," replied Nara. Robert followed her inside. Though a modest little shack, Robert liked it. Robert liked it for though it was small, it was spacious and practical. Robert never cared for the flaunting of wealth and opulent decoration. He appreciated what was practical and would not spend a coin more than what he needed to unless it was for practical purposes. Right at the corner of the shack, next to the fireplace, was a cot. In which Maya was sleeping. Robert beamed when he saw her stretch her tiny arms and legs around. "My little Maya." He walked by her side. And smiled when he saw her cooing as she looked up at him with a broad and beaming smile. As he looked down at her, he saw her full head of wiry black hair. And her sapphire blue eyes. There can be no doubt. She truly is my daughter. Though out of wedlock, I would never have her shunned for that. She may be a bastard, but she is my daughter. Robert placed the 2 dolls on the table next to the cot. "I bought these for her in Harrenhal," he gently whispered to Nara. She beamed as she looked down on them. "Lucky girl. Here, Maya. These are for you," she whispered as she passed them both to Maya. Maya took hold of both dolls and hugged them close to her. She kissed both of them several times. Robert beamed down at her at how she treated her dolls. "Aren't you the cutest little girl in the world?" Nara picked up Maya and kissed her forehead and gently rocked her in her arms. Robert beamed at the adorable girl held in her mother's arms. "Hello, Maya," Robert whispered as he took a knee, for his head came up to Nara's breasts even when she was stood straight. Nara gently placed Maya on the floor. And Maya giggled as she stood tall. For even at a year old, she would run and charge without any fear. She truly is a Baratheon. Robert laughed as he picked her up with one hand. "Have you been good to your mother, little one?" he asked. She giggled in reply as she reached up for his rough and bearded cheek. Robert laughed as she pulled at some of the hairs on his beard. "Now don't you do that to your father," Maya, Nara said scoldingly. "It's all right. It doesn't hurt," Robert replied with an assuring smile. Before he turned back down to Maya. She giggled even more as Robert lifted her up in the air. And he caught her as she fell back down. She giggled as he repeated this a few times. Robert passed her back to Nara, when she began to tire. Nara kissed her a few times before she started to fall asleep. "How are things at the Drunken Falcon Inn?" "Quiet. No tourneys are coming up yet, so our patrons are few and far between," she replied. "Would you consider moving elsewhere?" "You and Maya?" asked Robert. "It is what they deserve. A place in Storm's End with me. And with Lyanna. She can become a handmaiden to Lyanna. And Maya can grow up beside our children." "Where would we go, Robert?" "There aren't many places that would accept a girl with little coin or prospects and a bastard daughter," she replied. "Come with me then. To Storm's End. I leave for there a few moons from now. And when I return, I will wed my lady Lyanna Stark. I will provide for you and for Maya both. I won't leave you both here to be scorned at," Robert promised. Nara's eyes welled with tears from her reply to him. But now she faced him with hope. Are you serious, Robert?" she asked. "I am. I promise. You both will come with me to Storm's End," he said before hugging her and kissing Maya's forehead. "After all that her own kin put her through. After all that I put her through. She and Maya deserve a fresh start. And I will give that to the both of them. In Storm's End." Elbereth 6. Elbereth finished sparring with Kyle. Elbereth prided himself as being better with a lance and sword on horseback than on foot. For he always kept a firm grip on his horse. But on foot, Elbereth felt his skill was lacking. There was a time when he felt that he was at least better than Ned with swords. But that time came to an end. For he saw how Ned fared against Robert. Though eventually Robert would eventually emerge as victor with his great hammer, Ned fared incredibly well, for a man on his own against the great Storm Lord, or the Strong Storm as some had begun to call him since Harrenhal. Perhaps Robert was right. Perhaps Ned's skill has far improved. He never did compete in Harrenhal as we had done. But there's no telling what being wed to the incredibly fair Sheridan has done to make him try and impress her. Elbereth smiled as he put down his sword and shield. And as his good squire, Joffrey Crane, the young heir to Red Fort, helped him take off his armor plating and chainmail, Elbereth heard the faint sound of an alluring woman's giggle. He turned and from the corner of his eye, he spied the woman in question. He spotted Ned and Ashera walking together. There can be no doubt that they wed because they loved each other. If she was trying to wed her way into House Stark, she could have easily tried to seduce Brandon into her bed. And he probably would have favored her over the lovely Catelyn Tully. Elbereth knew little of love. Of course, he had spent days and nights drinking in feasts, fighting in taverns and charming girls and women, lowborn and highborn with Robert. But never had he ever felt love as the poets and troubadours wrote and sung of. But when he looked at the two, he could see that they loved each other. Whenever he saw the two together, they were never seen apart. Never were their hands not joined together. Nor were their eyes not fixed on each other, even when speaking with others. "Will I have that?" Elbereth wondered as Joffrey took the heavy chainmail shirt and took it back into the armory. Will I ever have a loving marriage with Lysa Tully? I would hope so. To be wed to a fair lady and to rule the Uri together. Elbert's eyes turned to see Maester Coleman walk down the steps and to the training yard. My lord. Lord Urin summons you to his solar. Good thing I had just finished and was taking my armor off, Elbert thought as he turned to Kyle. I'll see you later. He nodded in reply whilst his squire passed him a cup of water. He took one last glance at Ned and Ashura whilst Yon began to spar with Robert. Looking at the former pair, Elbert was happy to see Ned so happy. For as long as he could remember, Ned had been so unhappy because no Vale lady would dance with him or even spare him a glance. But Ashura Dane, perhaps the most beautiful woman Elbert had ever seen, was always beaming with happiness whenever she was in the presence of her husband and holding his hand. Elbert followed Maester Coleman to Uncle John's solar. Elbert never failed to appreciate how just a trek from one place to another in the Uri was enough to stretch his legs for the day. More so than when he would go for a run when he was in Harrenhal, Runestone, Iron Oaks or the Red Fort. Elbert and Maester Coleman arrived at Uncle John's solar, where Elbert saw Uncle John reading a letter with a smile. You summoned me, Uncle, asked Elbert. Uncle John looked up from the letter and smiled at him. Indeed, I did. Come, Elbert said Uncle John, still smiling. Elbert sat opposite Uncle John at his desk. He put the letter down. From a quick glance, Elbert spotted the broken seal on the letter. It was that of a leaping trout. A letter has just come from Riverrun. Speaking of my betrothal to Lord Tully's daughter, he asked. Yes, indeed. The first marriage between an Urin and the daughter of a Lord Paramount for many years ever since my grandfather Donal wed Elissa Tyrell, said Uncle John. And when will we be wed? Asked Elbert. When she turns 5 and 10. Then a dual wedding shall take place in Riverrun. Between you and Lady Lysa and Lady Caitlin and Brandon Stark. Notes. Robert has promised to take care of Maya Stone and her mother. And John tells Elbert that he shall be wed very soon to Lysa. Chapter 44, The Blackfish and the Young Fish. Summary. Brynden pours his hopes onto Edmure being a skilled warrior like he is whilst planning Edmure's future with Hoster. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Brynden 4. Brynden watched as Edmure shot at targets on the archery range. Ha! Look, uncle, said Edmure. Brynden could only roll his eyes rather than berate his nephew. He looked at where his arrow had struck the target. It hit the target in the neck. A fine shot, Edmure. For a man that cannot move at all, nor raise his shield, nor duck for cover, nor hide behind something. Edmure flushed with embarrassment at the rebuke. Then Brynden walked to the shield stand, where small shields Edmure's size were lined up. Tell you what. Let's put your eye and hands to the test, Brynden said as he took hold of a shield. What do you mean, uncle? Asked Edmure. There are 10 shields here. I will throw each of them up in the air. I want you to see how difficult it is to hit a moving target. That will force you to think hard. Think where the target will go. And think how best to hit it. Do you understand? Edmure nodded and with an earnest look on his face. Good. At least he is taking this seriously. Which he should. He will one day be Lord of Riverrun and Lord Paramount of the Riverlands. And if his father is successful, he will be uncle to the future Lord of Winterfell and future Lord of the Uri. Brynden kept a firm grip of the first shield. He watched as Edmure took the nearest arrow from his quiver. Ready. Before Edmure could even reply, Brynden threw it up in the air. Edmure quickly knocked the arrow and fired it. Quite badly. The arrow bounced off of the wall 5 feet above from where the shield had even flown across. Brynden raised a brow at his accuracy. I wasn't even ready, uncle, he complained. And you think that that is acceptable, do you, lad? When you're on the battlefield, the enemy will never give you a chance to get ready before they fight. They'll never say you first, I insist, before they charge their cavalry and infantry at you. They'll never give you the chance to raise your shield when they unleash a shower of arrows upon you. Edmure flushed with annoyance again before he angrily scratched an itch on the back of his neck. Fine, he snapped before grabbing another arrow. Brynden rolled his eyes yet again before taking another shield. He threw it in the opposite direction this time. Edmure shot an arrow. This time, Brindon nodded with approval when it hit the wall just a foot below where the shield had been before it fell to the ground. "You're getting better." "That's good," Brindon said with a nod. Edmure smiled at the praise before he quickly grabbed another arrow. "Good, he's learning to be ready." Brindon took another shield and threw it up again. And this time, he heard a faint thunk. He turned to see the shield fall to the ground. And as it landed, the arrow shaft snapped in half, with the arrowhead sticking out of the back of the shield, whilst what was left of the arrow shaft was snapped off, a mere inch sticking out of where it had hit the shield. "Good. Well done, Edmure." "Good shooting," said Brindon. Edmure smiled at the praise again as he grabbed another arrow. But before he could take up another shield, Brindon saw Maester Vimmen enter the training yard. "Sir Brindon. Lord Tully summons you to his solar." Brindon nodded before turning to Edmure. "We will continue this another time. Until then, remember today's lesson." "Now what is the name of today's lesson?" he asked. Edmure stammered slightly as he tried to think of what he was referring to. "I don't know, uncle." "Yes, you do. I was saying it only a moment ago." His eyes opened wide when he realized it. "Always be ready and never be caught unawares." Brindon nodded with approval before patting his shoulder. "Exactly. There's a reason behind each of my lessons, Edmure. So long as you learn from them, you'll never make a wrong step on the battlefield. Now, get out of your training armor and go and study with Maester Vimmen." Brindon walked to Hoster's solar. There he saw Hoster drink from a cup of wine before he looked up at Brindon. "Brindon. How goes your training of my son?" "It goes well. He is a fast learner." Hoster frowned slightly. "Don't you feel that you are too harsh on him?" Brindon raised a brow at that. "I would call what father put the pair of us through too harsh, brother." "Then what would you call what you put my son and heir through?" asked Hoster. "I would call it breaking down the spoiled heir to Riverrun and reforging him into a knight and warrior worthy to be your heir and to lead Riverrun's armies into the battlefield, should it come to it." "If you say so," Hoster replied with a raised brow before he put a letter down on his desk. What could this be about? More arrangements to suit his ambitions? Or has he finalized the marriages for Lysa and Kat? "Anyway, all the arrangements have been made," said Hoster as Brindon sat down. "Arrangements? For what?" "For you to convince me to wed." Brindon asked with a slight smirk. Hoster scowled in reply at that. "What good would it have done for me to wed? There are no castles for me to inherit. And Riverrun would be overflowing with Tullys if I had wed. No. For Lysa to wed Elberatarin and for Kat to wed Brandon Stark. By this time in 2 years, Kat will be the future Lady of Winterfell and Lysa the future Lady of the Eyrie," Hoster replied grandly. Brindon nodded at that. Truly securing the future of House Tully and the Riverlands with grand alliances. Both Brandon Stark and Elberatarin are good lads. Having met them in Harrenhal and gotten the measure of them both myself. They'll treat Kat and Lysa well, Brindon added. Indeed. And should our king's volatile nature affect the Riverlands, we shall count House Stark and House Arryn as friends and allies, said Hoster. But he forgets his son and heir. And Edmure, asked Brindon. What of Edmure, asked Hoster. I refer to the fact that no betrothal has been set in stone for the future Lord of Riverrun, Brindon explained. Hoster rolled his eyes at that. You have no need to remind me. I've been getting ravens from Walder Free offering this daughter or that granddaughter for his hand. Gods, never free. If the 7 are good, they will put that old weasel to rest. He brings shame to the Riverlands and his own house with his antics. As does his more unpleasant sons. Once he does die, his eldest, Stevran, can bring their house to order. I agree on the phrase. But there are others. The heir to House Bracken has 2 daughters now and no sons. Both Vance families have a daughter or 2. It wouldn't be amiss if you were to wed Edmure to the daughter of a Riverlord. Otherwise your bannermen will think that you think lowly of them and wish for your children to marry high, Brindon said. I am well aware of that. And I have had a few candidates in mind for Edmure's hand, once he is old enough, he replied. Not Cersei Lannister, I hope. Though she is reputedly a very fair and beautiful girl, she is the daughter of Tywin Lannister. And he is a man whom is responsible for the atrocities committed against the Reynes and Tarbecks. Whom then? A Lannister. A Tyrell, asked Brynden. Either of the two. Perhaps even Rhaegar's daughter, Princess Rhaenys, Hoster replied. Brynden frowned at that. You may have succeeded in marrying with the Arryns and the Starks. But the Targaryens is another matter entirely. Just give what I have said some thought, brother. A marriage with one of our bannermen would tell them that we haven't forgotten them. Notes. Hoster thinks he can marry off Edmure to a family of a Lord Paramountcy just as he is doing for his daughters, whilst Brynden wants him to marry Edmure off to a bannerman's daughter. Which choice shall Hoster make? Chapter 45, Two More Dragons. Summary. House Targaryen is joined by more little dragons. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Elia 8. Elia struggled to sit down as she sat down for breakfast with her ladies-in-waiting. Rhaenys was eating in a high chair at the table. She beamed up at her when she sat down. "Mama," she said before running up to her. Elia beamed at Rhaenys as she charged towards her. "Hello, my little dragon rider. How are you this fair morning?" she asked before kissing her forehead. "She and her little Balerion have been causing havoc to no end across the stone drum," Princess said Uncle Luwin with a grin. "Have you, my naughty little princess?" asked Elia with a teasing smirk before she hugged Rhaenys tightly. "Come, princess. Let your mother eat. Otherwise she'll spend the entire morning hugging and kissing you," said Lara before she took Rhaenys' hand. "You know me too well," Elia said as Lara walked with Rhaenys back to her chair at the table. Myla Waters, a serving girl, brought Elia her breakfast on a platter. "Thank you, Myla," said Elia with a beaming smile. Myla's young but pox-marked face blushed with her name being remembered by Elia. Since coming to Dragonstone with Rhaegar for the first time, Elia had taken the time to know all of whom served her at the Stone Drum as well as those whom served House Targaryen in the Red Keep. She would always remember the names of those whom served her. And she would always ask about themselves and their families. Indeed, when Rhaegar was absent from either Dragonstone or King's Landing, it was one of these pastimes that helped Elia endure Rhaegar's absences as he slowly became obsessed with prophecies. Elia took small bites of the food. Cut up pieces of fruit, scrambled eggs on toast and a few cut up pieces of salmon. And a cup of water on the side. "I'll be happy once this is all over. And I can drink wine again. And spend time with my Rhaenys and her future little brother or sister." But as Elia had eaten half of what was on her plate, she felt a great pain in her stomach. She reached for it with both hands. "Elia." She looked up to Lara and Miria, whom both nervously looked at her. Uncle Luwin looked with afraid for her as he stood by her side. At first she did not want them to worry. But she remembered this pain. She remembered feeling this way on the day she gave birth to Rhaenys. And her fears were confirmed when she felt her water break. "Get Maester Alan. Now," she said loudly, though trying to calm herself, so as not to frighten Rhaenys. Uncle Luwin rushed to Elia's side immediately and held her up by her arms whilst Lara took Rhaenys' hand and Miria rushed to find Maester Alan. "Help me. Uncle Luwin, help me," she begged as she tried not to scream. "It's all right, Elia, my dear. It's all right," he promised as he quickly carried her from the feasting room and to her bedchambers. He ran inside, before gently laying Elia down on the bed. Elia screamed as she lay down. "Gods, don't take me away. Don't let me leave Rhaenys alone." Elia screamed as tears fell from her eyes. But as she lay down and Uncle Luwin lifted the folds of her dress up, Maester Alan, Lara and Miria entered her bedchambers. "Sir Luwin, take them out of here," he gestured to Lara and Miria. "My ladies, you must leave," he begged. Both Miria and Lara looked at him with angry and tear-filled eyes before they quickly left. Maester Alan stood by her side and held Elia's hand. "Breathe, princess, you must breathe. Breathe and push. It won't be long, you must push hard," he said. "I can't. I can't." Elia screamed. "You can. You can, Elia. I promise that you can," said Uncle Luwin with a tear-stained face. Elia screamed as she tried to breathe and push. She panted as the Maester's apprentices, newly arrived, stood over her whilst Maester Alin was stood by her legs. Push. Again, princess. Push again. I see the head, just a little more. Again, she screamed and she wept as she struggled to push. Gods help me. Help me. But as she pushed, she felt anger. Where in the seven hells is Roriger? Dreaming of prophecies in Summer Hall? Or reading scrolls in King's Landing? Roriger had been there in Dragonstone when she gave birth to Rhaenys. But he was not present here and now. Not when Elia struggled to give birth to their second child. For which Elia couldn't find herself to forgive him as she pushed and screamed again and wept. Elia looked up at Uncle Lewin, whom was damping her face with a wet cloth and holding her hands. Push. Princess, push. Just once more. Elia wept as she struggled to both breathe and push. She did not scream for Roriger. Instead, she screamed for mother, father, Doran and Oberyn. Elia tried to breathe as she screamed once more. But as she panted, she heard the crying of a babe. She tried to look up, but her vision was blurring. Uncle, she tried to say. Maester. Her vision fades. Help her. Uncle Lewin demanded furiously. Care for the prince. Take him aside, clean him and feed him. Bring some towels and cot. Maester Alin commanded. Prince. A son. My son, Elia faintly whispered as she shut her eyes and her head landed on her pillow. Roriger V. As Roriger stood on the quay, he thought of Elia's gestation. She must have given birth by now. To the prince. The prince that was promised. The instrument that will save the world. Roriger saw Nathaniel Fowler, squire to Sir Lewin, stood at the quay stable. My prince, he said with a bow. The princess, has she given birth? Asked Roriger without hesitation. She has, successfully too, my prince. But the maester has consigned her to bed, he replied. Roriger didn't hear the rest of what he said. Instead he sprinted to the nearest horses at the stable, accompanied by John, Miles, Richard, Arthur and Oswell. They climbed onto the horses. Roriger threw a bag of coins to the horsemaster before he turned his horse to the stone drum. She must have given birth to Aegon. To the prince that was promised. It was prophesied. The prophecy must come true. If the true enemy is to be thwarted, the dragon must have 3 heads. So it is written. So shall it be. Roriger had spent the previous weeks at first in King's Landing. And then in Summer Hall. He would retreat to Summer Hall, for inspiration. And for peace and quiet. But it was when he was there, that he would meet the Witch of Summer Hall. She whom would tell him what she saw in her green dreams. Never for coin. But instead for him to sing to her of her long-lost friend, Jenny of Old Stones. The information she saw and told him of, it was crucial. He knew that. For when the true enemy emerged from its ancient slumber, then the realm would be better equipped to face this ancient foe. The foe that threatened the land of the living. Even if the living did not care for such a threat. Nor care for the legends that foretold of it. They arrived at the stone drum. Upon arriving, Roriger climbed down from his horse and ran to the doors. Once Elia gives birth again, all will be well. Once the dragon has 3 heads, then the realm will be ready to face the true enemy. Once Aegon is wed to Rhaenys and Visenya, then the realm shall at last defeat the true enemy. Roriger ran upstairs to his bedchambers shared with Elia. He could hear the faint crying of a babe. But then he heard the cheerful sounds of his daughter. Of Rhaenys. She was successful. The prophecy will come true. As Roriger entered his bedchambers, he saw Elia lying in their bed with Maester Alin and Grand Maester Pycelle watching over her. And there was 2 cots beside her. 2. She gave birth to twins. Even better. 2 babes lay wrapped in towels lay in the cots, with Lara Blackmont stroking the babes, both of whom now fell asleep. Rhaenys was sat by Elia's side. Beaming as Elia stroked her hair, whilst she hugged her cat gifted to her by mother, Balerion. Once you are grown up with Aegon and Visenya, you all shall be as fearsome as her namesake and be the heroes of the realm that will be sung of for thousands of years from now. Elia, he said. He ignored the furious glares of both Elia's ladies-in-waiting. Though he knew why they were angry at him. And he understood. He had wanted to be by Elia's side when she gave birth to their prophesied son Egon. The prince that was promised. Rhaegar. Rhaenys, say hello to your father. Rhaenys beamed as she jumped from the bed and hugged Rhaegar's leg. Papa, she said excitedly. But Balerion scowled as he glared at Rhaegar. Unlike how he allowed himself to be stroked by Elia, whom purred as she stroked him. Balerion never liked it when Rhaegar was in the room. Hello, Rhaenys, my little princess, he said before taking a knee and hugging her. He kissed her forehead before lifting her up in his arms. Rhaegar sat by Elia's side as she lay down, exhausted, he could see. Are you well, he asked. I am now, she said weakly. I almost died, Rhaegar. And the Grand Maester says I cannot give birth again, she said. Rhaegar frowned at hearing that. Though there once was affection between the two of them, from when they were wed to when Rhaenys was first presented to the court of the Red Keep, there was little affection between them now. But even so, Rhaegar knew of her importance. That she was the vessel that would bring the 3 dragons to the realm that would save the world. And so, she had. He stroked Elia's beautiful face and smiled. But you are well now. Rhaenys has you. And as does our newest little dragons, he said before turning to the babes resting in their cots. But still, like Balerion the cat, both Miria Jordan and Lara Blackmont glared hatefully at Rhaegar, so great was their devotion to Elia. Asheridan would be doing the same, were she not wed to Eddard Stark. Is it a son? And a daughter, he asked, with desperation in his voice. For so frightened he was when she told him that she was now barren. Yes, she said. Then the 7 have heard my prayers. And have answered with giving us 3 dragons. This is the greatest day in the realm. We are indeed saved. Elia never need worry about trying to have more children. Now that the world is safe from the true enemy. What will their names be? Visenya, for our girl. And Egon, what better name for a king? Will you make a song for them? Asked Elia. Already all 3 have a song. For Egon is the prince that was promised, and his is the song of ice and fire. And the dragon, it has 3 heads, Rhaegar said, beaming with pride as he held Elia's hand. Notes. So, Elia gives birth to twins. A wonderful time for House Targaryen. But Rhaegar, as usual, can only think of his precious prophecies. Even Balerion cannot stand Rhaegar. I decided for Elia to give birth to both Egon and Visenya, because Rhaegar's obsession with thinking about the dragon having 3 heads just wasn't going to fit into this story in the long run. Chapter 46, Another Trade Deal. Summary. Lucerys continues to rebuild what House Velaryon once had. Whilst Baela learns heartbreaking news. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Lucerys 4. Lucerys was glad to have returned home to Driftmark. As Master of Ships, he was required to be at King's Landing regularly. Not merely to attend small council sessions and to advise Aerys, but also to do his duties as Master of Ships, such as meeting with delegations from foreign nations to discuss trade matters with them before bringing them to the king for his approval. But as he was Master of Ships, and possessed his own ship, the Dragon of Driftmark, he could take it on short voyages around Blackwater Bay and the Narrow Sea. These were the times in which Lucerys could truly enjoy himself. As captain of his own ship and with nothing by the open sea in front of him, the Crownland's sunshine shining down on he and his crew and the calm narrow sea winds blowing briskly at the sails. I do not regret being a Velaryon. I certainly do not regret being Master of Driftmark and Lord of the Tides. But, I sometimes wish that the king had chosen a red wine to be his Master of Ships as opposed to me. There's nothing more enjoyable than the feeling of the fresh sea breeze blowing against your sails as you traverse the 14 seas. Lucerys climbed down from the hull of the Dragon of Driftmark, and walked onto the quay. Father, welcome home, said Montfort, as he and his brother stood at the head of the welcoming reception. And Oren held onto the reins of 3 horses. Now just a short ride back home before I can rest. Lucerys smiled as he rode with Montfort and Oren from Seahorse Harbour and back to Castle Driftmark. As they did so, Lucerys looked around the surrounding settlements on Driftmark Isle. He could see the faint outlines and outskirts of High Tide, Corlys Velaryon's personal seat, and Spicetown. Both were shadows of their former selves. Both had been built in the glory days of House Velaryon. Back when the famed sea snake had turned House Valerian into one of the wealthiest and most powerful houses in Westeros, alongside the likes of the Lannisters, Hightowers, Redwynes and Tyrells. But both were in ruined states ever since the Dance of the Dragons. It was largely rumored that criminals and homeless vagabonds called both ruins home. I should have something done for both of them. All Valerius before me have failed to do such a thing. But Montford and Oren, they can do something. Oren has brought us wealth from his voyages. And Montford is a capable administrator. They can do what needs to be done. And once both places are restored, then we might have a chance of rising from the state of mire that House Valerian is currently in. Once both are restored, more subjects will call Driftmark home. More ships will sail under House Valerian's banner. And House Valerian can rise once again. Is something the matter, father? Lucerys turned to Oren, whom looked at him with concern. Lucerys shook his head. Just thinking of the future. And what House Valerian will do in the future, Lucerys replied. Any plans in particular you have, father? Asked Montford. Perhaps a few, Lucerys replied with a shrug. I've been meaning to ask, father. What does House Valerian benefit from the deal made with the Greyjoys? Asked Oren. A stipend. For whatever coin they make a year, they send us a tribute of 1/10 of their income, Lucerys replied. And you think that the Greyjoys will honor this deal? Asked Montford. I suspect that they will do whatever they can to attempt to slither out of it. But I believe that in their eagerness to prove themselves a civilized people and ones whom are trustworthy to trade across the Seven Kingdoms and beyond, they will not attempt to stifle on payments owed to House Valerian. For we guarantee good relations with the Iron Throne and more, Lucerys explained. And what will we do with such coin? Asked Oren. There is plenty I want to accomplish. First, here at home. Montford smiled at that. The ruins of Hightide and Spicetown, he said, realizing what he meant. Yes, indeed. But not just that. To expand our fleet. Build more ships and sending our ships across the 14 seas and bringing fortunes back home, Lucerys explained. Arriving at Castle Driftmark, Lucerys began to make plans in his solar. Plans to build a new and enlarged merchant fleet. With ships built to weather a long and difficult voyage across the open sea and avoiding the coastlines. And ones capable of defending themselves from attacks by pirates. And then to visit the 2 ruined settlements in Driftmark. That of the town of Spicetown. And the castle of Hightide. Whilst Corlys Valerian had built Spicetown to be home to the sailors of the Valerian fleet and their families, Hightide had been built to replace the damp and crowded old seat of Castle Driftmark. Especially when it was Corlys' brother, Larys, whom died of grayscale in Castle Driftmark. Lucerys nodded when he finished looking over sketches of the completed construction of both Spicetown and Hightide, back from when they were built by the Sea Snake himself. With these, and with new wealth coming in from the Greyjoys, we might have a chance of building a new. But first, I will need a lot of coin. Coin to get all of this started. He was interrupted by a knock on the door. Yes. My lord. A raven has come, said Maester Brecker. Come in. He entered, holding a letter in his hand. Does it come from King's Landing? Asked Lucerys. No, my lord. From the Starks of Winterfell, he replied as he passed the sealed letter to him. The Starks. First Quarian Greyjoy and now Rickard Stark. This year is full of surprises. Both the North and the Iron Islands are abandoning their self-imposed obscurity, it would seem. But to what end? He broke the seal of the snarling Stark direwolf and unfurled the letter. To Lucerys of House Valerian. Master of Driftmark. Lord of the Tides. Master of Ships. Lord Valerian, as you are undoubtedly aware, I am in the middle of a project which I am certain shall benefit not only the North, but the realm as a whole. I speak of course of the Kalin Canal. Its construction nears completion. But it requires work which needs something to hasten its completion. I have spoken with the architects in charge, and they all agree on one thing which can hasten this completion. Wildfire. I have written previously to the Guild of Alchemists in the capital in the interest of purchasing wildfire. However, the guild is busily building a stockpile of wildfire on the king's command and would not dare part with any of it. I learned from a variety of sources that House Valerian is in possession of wildfire. I require a total of 50 barrels of wildfire. And I am willing to pay a price of 200,000 gold dragons for this. Kindly let me know your answer as soon as possible, my lord, whether you accept or decline. Yours sincerely, Ricard of House Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North. Lucerys couldn't believe what he was reading. This was it. What he had been waiting for. The chance to build House Valerian anew. And it came from two of the most unlikely of houses. This is perfect. It just so happens that we are in possession of 60 barrels. And we can part with 50. They serve no purpose lying in the cellars of Castle Driftmark. But 200,000 gold dragons. That is more than what I need to get started in rebuilding both House Valerian's fleet, Spicetown and High Tide. Baelor 6. Baelor smiled to his brothers, Gunthor and Humphrey. The two jousted against each other with miniature lances and shields, charging down the practice jousting lists in the Hightower's courtyard. Baelor flushed with pride at seeing both his youngest brothers ride their horses so well and to joust against each other. For ever since his triumphant return from the victorious tourney at Harrenhal, his youngest brothers had sought to follow his example and become as skilled at jousting as he. Indeed, all small folk of Old Town cheered for Baelor's arrival when he, Garth, Linus and Gunthor returned from Harrenhal's tourney. Baelor nodded as the two rode back to their starting positions. This was their fourth joust of the day. And still there was no victor. "They are making me proud," Baelor thought as they took lances from servants. Baelor clapped his hands only once. And his brothers both charged at each other, their miniature lances aimed, in spite of their weary and pained states, Baelor noticed. But he was proud of both of them for continuing as they were, until one was defeated. And finally, the two clashed lances. Gunthor's lance connected with Humphrey's lower breastplate. But Humphrey's lance connected with Gunthor's upper breastplate. And in doing so, Gunthor fell from his horse. Baelor and Garth both clapped for Humphrey's victory. "Good jousting. Well done both of you," Garth complimented before he helped Humphrey from his horse, whilst Gunthor still lay on the ground. "Now, Humphrey, remember what a good and honourable knight does when he has beaten his opponent," asked Baelor. Humphrey realised what he meant and ran to Gunthor's side. He helped his older brother up, which Gunthor thanked him for with good virtue and forthrightness. "Now, keep jousting like that, both of you, and you both may known as the most skilled jousters and knights in the realm," Baelor complimented. "And perhaps one of them can join the King's Guard like Great Uncle Drold." Baelor saw Maester Dorian walking from the main door to the High Tower. "My father wishes to see me," asked Baelor. He nodded at that. "Yes, Sir Baelor." Baelor left the training yard and began to make his way to the High Tower and to Father Solar. "I hope that this isn't about me finding a bride. I have no wish to find a bride. Not when all I can think about is her. Even after all of these years, and being wed to that arrogant prick of a prince, I still love her so much." Baelor entered Father Solar. He saw Father put down a few ancient tomes. "Perhaps he can invite the Crown Prince to Old Town. I have heard it said that he obsesses over scrolls, tomes and ancient books. If it is true, then he would spend days and weeks reading each and every book Father has in his possession and in the archives and libraries of the Citadel." "Good day, Father," said Baelor. "Baelor, I trust you have recovered from your festive celebrations of your glorious victory at Harrenhal. Though victorious, I will always feel defeated. For she is still wed to him. I have. And have been teaching both Gunthor and Humphrey how to joust," Baelor replied. "Good. That shall ensure their futures as knights and men of House Hightower. But what is there to be said of your own future, Baelor? Why don't I like where this is going?" "Of what do you mean, Father?" asked Baelor. "You are 23 now. And yet you still remain unwed. Your sister Aeleri has had 2 sons and is carrying a 3rd child. But you have no heirs. That shouldn't be the case. For you are heir to perhaps one of the wealthiest and most powerful houses of Westeros that isn't a Lord Paramountcy. And yet, still in your 20s, you remain a bachelor. For what?" Baelor did not show any interest at any of the fair and beautiful ladies, young, his age and older, he had met in Harrenhal. And he showed no interest in the letters sent to him and to Father from across the Reach, the Riverlands, the Vale, the Westerlands and the Crown Lands. Because he knew that not one bride that they offered, could ever be Elia. In any event, you should also send a raven of congratulations. To whom? Asked Baylor. House Targaryen. Your Queen of Love and Beauty has reportedly given birth to twins. A son and a daughter. It is said that she remains bedridden, but she recovers. Baylor nodded whilst biting at the inside of his cheeks, as well as making fists with both his fingers and his toes. He could feel his nails dig into the palms of his hands as he struggled not to rage at the news. If that is all, Father. It is, he replied. Baylor stood up and left Father's solar. He walked to his bedchambers. And as he sat down on his bed, he finally fell on his back. He raged and wept as he thought of Elia being bedridden and treated as a broodmare to the Targaryens whilst Rhaegar would flaunt his newborn children to the realm. Notes. Lucerys' plans for House Velaryon are bearing fruit with this new deal from Rickard Stark, so that he can rebuild all that Corlys Velaryon once lost. And Baylor hears of Elia's news. Poor Baylor. Chapter 47, 2 Kraken's gone, 2 dragons born. Summary. Harlon shares his thoughts with his wife, Alanis Harlaw, whilst Rhaegar presents his newborn children to R'hllor and Aes. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Harlon 6. Harlon frowned as he looked at the empty bedchambers where Balon slept. And then at the ones in which Euron once slept in. We never agreed with anything. We fought all time, Balon and I. And Euron would always stir things up between our family. For no other reason than for his own amusement. But they were family. They were my brothers. And yet, the drowned god saw them kill each other in a damned finger dance. Why must the world be so cruel to House Greyjoy? Harlon watched as the servants cleared their possessions from their rooms. Balon had kept prizes he had won from paying the iron price. From swords, axes, shields and jewelry, all of which he claimed in raids and taking prizes at the stepstones from as young as 5 and 10 with the cleft jaw. And as for Euron, he was different. He never cared for wealth or flaunting what prizes he had paid for with the iron price. Harlon recognized early on that what Euron truly wanted was power. Absolute power. As well as mocking symbols of authority such as the sea stone chair and the ruins of the Grey King's Hall and the stone ribs of Nagar's Hill. May the drowned god be kind to them. Father treated them well in death. And may the mermaids see to their every need. And may we all find kinship together when all we 9 brothers are reunited in the drowned god's hall. If it is his will. Harlon felt bitter as he looked at their now empty bedchambers. Theon and Asher may one day live in these. I hope that they never grow up as we did. And that they enjoy a close kinship, rather than be forever squabbling over such petty matters. And that they both believe in the new way. Harlon left the corridor in which their bedchambers were and walked to find Theon and Asher. Harlon considered himself a good father as opposed to father. For he never would take them away from Pike and force them from a pleasant childhood and into a hard and cruel one in which children younger had died at the hands of foul men. Harlon didn't intend for them to ever take up an oar or an axe until they were at least 12. In spite of the fact that he had been 7 when he had killed for the first time, Harlon didn't want that for either Theon or Asher. He wanted them to learn what it meant to be a Greyjoy on land first before going to sea and learning to row, sail and lead. Harlon entered his bedchambers. He smiled when he saw Alanis playing with both of their children. I see you need rescuing from these 2 little Krakens, Harlon said with a wide grin. I. And quickly too. Alanis replied as Theon charged at both Asher and his mother, knocking them both on their backs. Harlon smiled as he sat down beside Alanis. Come here, Theon. You leave your mother and sister alone, Harlon said. Theon waddled to Harlon. Harlon beamed as he hugged Theon and ruffled his hair. Harlon adored both Theon and Asher. He had grown up as the eldest of 9 sons, all of whom sought to prove themselves as hardened warriors and captains, one after the other. Though they all had their differences, Harlon considered. Quentin and Donell were kind and not unnecessarily rough and tough as he was and as father had raised him to be. Whilst Balon and Euron ambitiously thought themselves above father and Harlon and that they could achieve greater things than the Red Kraken and the Last Reaver. Victorian had no ambitions other than to be remembered and to be Lord Captain of the Iron Fleet. Aragon and Aaron sought to captain their own ships and spill blood across the seas. Whilst sweet and endearing Robin, Harlon cared for him as though he was his own son, in spite of being 7 years older than Asher and 5 years older than Theon. After marrying Alanis on the shores of Pike, Harlon had promised himself that he would be a better father to his children than father ever was to he and his younger brothers. Father often had them fight each other to prove themselves to win. But Harlon never wanted this for Theon or Asher. He wanted them to find their own way in the world before they would commit to being a Greyjoy and finding their purpose. He could remember on the day that the resident drowned man, Grimstag Seaweedbeard, had blessed Asher a week after her birth. Harlon had silently promised her a promise he was keeping to still. I promise to treat you and your siblings well. All that I endured from father, you will never endure. I love you, my little girl. And I will always care for you, your mother and your future siblings. Will you take them soon? Harlon broke from his thoughts and turned to Alanis. What's that? He asked. Will you take them to sea soon? She asked. Harlon pursed his lips and shook his head. No, not yet. Why? When you were Theon's age, you were already rowing and sailing across the sunset sea, she said. But I do not want that for our children. I want them to spend a little longer here on Pike before they sail anywhere or take up a sword and axe and spill blood. They will not be great Ironborn if you mollycoddle them, she said. That's no excuse. I want them to learn on dry land before they learn at sea. Rhaegar 6. Rhaegar held Aegon gently in his arms as he walked through the throne room towards the Iron Throne, where father was sat and mother was stood on his left and Viserys was stood on his right. Rhaegar frowned when he saw him, whisper to Viserys. You are the disgrace and shame of House Targaryen. But do not bring Viserys down with you. My brother deserves better than you. He turned slightly to see Arthur, whom gently held Visenya in his arms. Rhaegar tried to calm himself on the walk to the Iron Throne. Of course he was happy. He was overjoyed to have fulfilled the prophecy. He had an heir. But most of all, the prince that was promised was born. He whom would fulfill the Song of Ice and Fire, and with his 2 sister wives by his side. But as always, he was fearful when confronted with the madness and volatile nature of father. He whom mocked the very foundations of the 7 kingdoms in the name of Valyrian pure blood. You bring more children, Rhaegar. More half-breeds born from that weak and feeble Dornish cunt. Rhaegar could almost hear both Arthur and Sir Barristan frown at his description of Elia. And he saw how mother infuriatingly glared at father. But Rhaegar only focused on both Aegon and Rhaenys being recognized as whom they were by father. For they were undeniably Targaryens, he knew that. Their skin, though more sun-kissed than that of Rhaegar's, was less so than that of Rhaenys. Their eyes were violet and Valyrian, just like his own. And their hair was silver blonde like his own and like father's. None can deny that they are of the blood of old Valyria and of the Rhoynar. Arthur stood by Rhaegar's side as they both held up Aegon and Visenya for father and mother to see. Mother beamed lovingly at her 2 new grandchildren. Rhaegar smiled at seeing mother beam with delight and even shed a few tears of happiness. Viserys smiled at seeing them, making Rhaegar happy. Good. You've finally done something useful for once in your life, Rhaegar. You and that Dornish whore of yours. Though their blood is still stained with that of a weak Dornish trollop, he sneered. You forget that we have the blood of the Martells, Danes, Blackwoods and Arryns in us as well as Valyrian blood, thought Rhaegar, almost rolling his eyes at the idiocy and hypocrisy of father. And where is she? Where is Elia? Father snapped. She is bedridden, father. The strain of giving birth was almost fatal for her, Rhaegar replied. Father only glared sneeringly. Let that be a reminder, for the weakness of those not Valyrians. I should have sent Stefan to find you a bride in lies, he snarled. Show Elia some respect. She almost died giving birth to Rhaenys over a year ago. And only a week ago, she almost died giving birth to Aegon and Visenya. She has given birth to the 3 whom will save the world from the true enemy. She gave birth to the prince that was promised. And what are their names? Father demanded. Rhaegar stood up with Arthur. He held out Aegon for father to see once again. My son, Aegon, your grace. And as he pulled him back towards him, Arthur held out Visenya. And Visenya. Good and true Valyrian names. But are they deserving to Targaryens of Dornish blood more so than Valyrian blood? He sneered. Holding on to Aegon was the only reason why Rhaegar did not smack father across the face. Mother must have sensed what he was thinking, for she took a step from the side of the Iron Throne and walked to his side. "My son. Let me see my beautiful little grandchildren," she said beamingly. Rhaegar made no objection as he gently passed Aegon to her. "Viserys, come meet your nephew and niece," she said. Viserys did as he was invited before Rhaegar turned to father. Father stood up from the Iron Throne. "House Targaryen's future is secure, my lords and ladies of the Seven Kingdoms. We have a king before us in my grandson, Aegon of House Targaryen," he announced. The nobility gathered inside all clapped and cheered for both Aegon and Visenya, though more for Aegon. "Next week, my lords and ladies, His Holiness, the High Septon, shall bless both my grandson, Prince Aegon, and my granddaughter, Princess Visenya, at the Great September with the sacred oils. And may we have a week of celebrations in the capital. For the successful birth of a Targaryen prince, worthy of Valyrian blood and Targaryen ancestry." Notes. Harlon wants his children to have more pleasant childhoods than he had had, growing up similar to Dalton Greyjoy. And Rhaegar, as usual, thinks only of the prophecies when introducing his parents to Aegon and Visenya. Chapter 48, The Triarchy. Summary. The Lannisters hear news from King's Landing. And across the narrow sea, three leaders meet. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Tijet v. Tijet was sat in Tywine solo with Geryon, Kevan, Jenna and, for some strange reason, Aemon. Tijet could never understand why it was that father had chosen to wed Jenna to the second son of Walder Frey, whom was nowhere near the line of succession. Especially when the eldest, Stephen Frey, was already wed and had 3 sons. If I didn't know any better, I would think that Tywine keeps Aemon here still as a court fool. For Johanna Lannister did geld Dalton Greyjoy's son Roderick and make him a court fool in Casterly Rock. Is this Tywine's way of keeping him entertained? The weasel wed to a lioness. Yes, that is an amusing tale. Truthfully, Tijet felt pity for his beloved sister Jenna. She was once one of the fairest maidens in the Westerlands. But then, at 7, she was betrothed by father to Aemon Frey. Tywine, at 10, was the only one whom spoke out against the match. Though since they were wed, she had given birth to 4 sons, Jenna had gained weight from her sadness at being wed to a weasel Frey. "Is there news, brother?" "Of Jaime?" asked Kevan. "Nothing we need be concerned of, yet. Pycelle assures me that Jaime has not been placed in harm's way, yet." "Is there a chance of that?" asked Geryon. "If there is one thing I have learned about Aes, it is that he is unpredictable, even to himself. If he thought you were trying to guess his next move, he would make the most erratic move just to prove a point," Tywine replied. "But no, I have called you all here, because I have learned something of great interest. From the north." "The north?" Kevan did say that Tywine tried to interest father into breaking the betrothal with Walder Frey in favor of one between Jenna and Rickard Stark. Only for father to moan about how offended Walder Frey would be if he did so. Tijet saw little of the Starks when he was at Harrenhal. But on the occasions that he had seen them, he had met them briefly at the jousting. He had congratulated Brandon Stark, heir to Winterfell, for successfully defeating a Dammar Brand in a joust before meeting his siblings, Eddard, Lyanna and Benjen. "What news is this, Tywine?" asked Tijet. "I learned from Pycelle that Rickard Stark is restoring the ruins of Moat Cailin and Wolf's Den in the north to gift to his spare sons. And thinking about it, I think it is a very wise decision. And it is one that would be worthwhile to implement in the Westerlands," Tywine answered. "But there are no such ruined places in the Westerlands, my lord," said Aemon. Tijet rolled his eyes, just from listening to the weasel speak. "I am currently resisting the urge to throw him from the very highest heights of Casterly Rock. Jenna would thank me for it. And it would be a service, to House Lannister and to all of Casterly Rock." "He refers to Castemaria and Tarbeck Hall," Imogen Jenna explained as she rolled her eyes in disappointment at him. "There is another that could be converted into another seat of a bannerman of House Lannister," Tywine said. Kevan. "What is that?" asked Tywine. "Castellon. Castellon. Now there is a fine place to call home. Smaller than the Lion's Keep of Lannisport, true. But, after some restoration works and building a town there and converting it into a place one could be proud to call home, I am certain that any Lannister would be glad to rule from it. Castellon, yes. That is a worthy consideration, Tywine replied with a nod. But for now, I shall begin works to have both Castamere and Tarbeck Hall restored. That they might be awarded to future bannermen of House Lannister, said Tywine. And more in House Lannister's armies, once settlers settle down in both settlements and in Castellon once it has been converted into a worthy keep, added Tijet. At which Tywine nodded in agreement. There was a knock on the door. Yes. Tywine demanded. My lord. A raven has come from King's Landing. Bearing the sigil of the Grand Maester, said Maester Crelan. Enter, Tywine commanded. Maester Crelan entered and passed him the letter in question. Tywine broke the seal and opened the letter. He raised a brow at reading it. He hummed before he seemingly reread the letter. Whilst Tijet thought of his intentions. If Tywine is doing what I think he intends to do, then I will be a very happy man. If he intends to restore both Castamere and Tarbeck Hall and convert Castellon, a former hunting lodge of the Kings of the Rock, into seats for myself, Geryon and Kevan, then, House Lannister's power will be increased. More banners will serve under House Lannister. More people will answer to House Lannister and to Casterly Rock. And the mineral mines in those regions will be opened once again. Which shall only increase the greater wealth of House Lannister and the Westerlands. Tywine finally looked up from the letter. Important news from the capital, he said. What could this be? He hasn't gone through what he said he would do, has he? To remove Elia Martell. Elia Martell has given birth to a healthy pair of twins. A son and a daughter. Yet another obstacle for Tywine's ambitions for Lannister blood in the Iron Throne. Of all the houses of Westeros, the only ones with blood on the Iron Throne are the Arryns, the Valerias, the Hightowers, the Martells, the Danes and even the Blackwoods. But never the Lannisters. The Targaryens should remember that they no longer possess dragons before their madness claims them. Cersei will be heartbroken, Geryon jested. Where does this leave us, Tywine? Asked Tijet. We might be able to secure a match between a future Lannister bride and Aegon. We may just have to accept that Cersei won't be queen, said Kevan. Cersei will be even more distraught. None of that matters whilst Jaime is still Aerys prisoner in the Red Keep, said Jenna. True. But, so long as Rhaegar keeps his word, and makes his move to remove Aerys from the Iron Throne, and Jaime from the Kingsguard, then as well as House Lannister's future, then also, our plans for the future, are secure, said Tywine. Vargid 6. The arrival of the first Magister of Myr and the Archon of Teosh was being celebrated across Lys. Whilst those of high standing and basic courtesy greeted Valerie's counterparts with good cheer and an enthusiastic welcome, those young lowborn were noted to have bared their asses for the Merman and Teoshes to see. Whilst the nobility of Lys frowned on such actions, when Vargid heard of it, he had laughed heartily for the first time in a long time. Vargid waited in the Deltala manse at Valerie's side for the arrival of the newest elected leaders of both of Lys' rivals. Vargid saw how focused Valerie's was on presenting himself to the two men. This is the first step, like he said. To restore the Triarchy. The Kingdom of the Three Daughters. Or the Kingdom of the Three Whores, depending on whom you asked. Valerie's eyes turned to the gates of the manse. And entered two wheelhouses. The first bore gold filigree and decoration and carvings all across the finely carved wood, as well as jewel-encrusted images of two crisscrossed Myrish stilettos on the dark and finely polished wood. And the other was the same, though with much finer decoration and gold and bejeweled carvings on the wood. And it was a notably larger wheelhouse than the Myrish one, Vargid noticed when he spotted the bejeweled images of sea snails on the Tiroshi wheelhouse. I've seen wealthy Lysan noblemen get furious over another's swords, wheelhouse, ship or horse being nicer, larger or more finely decorated than their own. Will that affect Valerie's plans? A herald stood in between where the wheelhouses were, whilst unsullied in service to both their guests took position to protect their respective masters. His Excellency, the first Magister of Myr, scion of the most venerable and noble House of Oster, defender of Old Valyria and Prince of the Disputed Lands, first Magister Draculos Oster. Prince of the Disputed Lands. Are you sure about that? A largely fat and overweight man climbed out of the Mirish wheelhouse. He was helped down by two slaves. As he glanced around, smiled when he saw a nearby slave hold a platter with cups of wine and refreshments. But then he glared at the sight of the Tiroshi wheelhouse, just as an unsullied in the service of Tiosh opened the wheelhouse door. This should be interesting. Berkibal Mehran is a noted former sellsword and warrior whom fought in the Golden Company, the Second Sons and the Storakraus. I've always wondered what a sellsword would look like if he had become a First Magister or even the Archon of Tiosh. His Excellency, the Archon of Tiosh, Sword of Greater Tiosh, Defender of Old Valyria, Prince of the Disputed Lands, Archon Berkibal Mehran the Herald announced. And he did far from disappoint the Gonfalonier of Lies. Though he was dressed in finely made clothes, Vargid was impressed that he had not succumbed to the temptations of the finer things in life. For he wore few jewelry and kept a fine sword by his side. He clearly had the look of a warrior, Vargid could tell. Welcome, esteemed guests. Please, drink and eat. We meet in my solar an hour from now once you are rested from your journey and have had a chance to enjoy my hospitality. Valaries offered generously. They accepted his hospitality and followed some slaves escorting them inside whilst Valaries and Vargid walked to his solar, from where they were to host their meeting. Valaries and Vargid sat together in the solar before their guests arrived. They sat down at his desk. With their Gonfaloniers stood behind them, just as Vargid stood behind Valaries during this meeting between three of the most powerful men in the Free Cities. You invited us here, Valaries. So, why? To threaten us from the disputed lands that do rightfully belong to the Free City of Myr, asked the fat First Magister of Myr. Nothing could be further from the truth, my friend. I have no wish to cause any animosity between our fair and wondrous cities, Valaries replied. Then what is your intention? Asked the Archon of Tiosh. I thought that this would be a welcome chance for the two of you both, to thank me for your appointments, he said. They both narrowed their eyes at him. Of what do you speak? Demanded Mehran. I speak of the gold I sent to bribe your former counterparts and peers in the conclave, he said before turning to Oster. And I speak of the leverage I gathered on your rivals from over the years, he added. If it was your intention for us to be elected, then why? To serve as your puppets. To claim the disputed lands. Mehran demanded angrily. No. For us to meet and for our cities to have a fresh start in diplomacy. Speak plainly, Valaries Oster demanded. I wanted us to meet, because I had the sense that you both were men of reason and that you both want what is best for your respective cities, said Valaries. I do, said Mehran. As do I. But what has this to do with why you wanted us here? Asked Oster. Valaries pressed his hands together before he spoke. To bring peace between our cities. To end the conflict which has so wounded all of our cities to the extent that we have bankrupted ourselves to fight wars and to be reliant on sellswords to do our fighting for us, said Valaries grandly. And how do you propose for this to succeed? Asked Oster. For us to unite into a great power that once stood against the might of Volantis, Bravos and Westeros combined. A power that was once the great hegemonic power of not only the Free Cities, but all of Essos. The Triarchy, Oster realized. Yes, the Triarchy. A power which for nearly 50 years, was the greatest power in the Free Cities. None could dare oppose it. Not Volantis. Not Bravos. Not even the dragon-riding Targaryen kings of Westeros. What I want is to change the way things are, for the better. For all our cities to be united once again, together. For the resolution of the stepstones and the disputed lands to finally end. And for our cities to be able to stand up against the likes of the Volantens and the Bravoses. Notes. Tywin cannot spend a day without making plots for House Lannister, as usual. And now, the Triarchy is reborn. How shall Westeros react? Chapter 49, A New Player Emerges. Summary. Harlon sees the fruits of his labors in the Riverlands after making an agreement with the Tullys. The small council learn of the Triarchy being re-established. And Valaries introduces Vargid to someone new, now that they plan a war to make new friends. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Roriga 7. Roriga left his bedchambers and walked to the small council. He had left Egon and Visenya under the care of Mother and Viserys. Whilst both Elia and Rhaenys were still in Dragonstone. Elia stayed to recover. And Roriger permitted for Rhaenys to stay and keep her mother company. He found that he missed the company of Elia. For she was good company to have. She provided good counsel for him. She never balked from her duty as his wife and the mother of his children. And she was pleasantly charming to all whom she met. He arrived at the small council. Already there was Lord Commander Hightower. Lord Commander, he greeted. My prince, he replied with a bow. Roriger took his seat whilst Sir Gerald remained stood behind his chair, as he usually did. Until the rest of the small council arrived. Fathers Lickspittle, Staunton, Merryweather, Chelstead and Pycelle. Varys soon followed after. Before father arrived, accompanied by Sir Jonnet Hoare and Oswell. Where is Lord Valerian? Asked Roriger. He remains at Driftmark fulfilling his duties as Lord of Driftmark, my prince, said Staunton. One of father's few competent and wise advisers. Roriger watched as father entered the small council. He shivered as he stalked to his seat, glaring at Roriger as he did so. Sat down in the small council, Roriger sought to learn of stewardship and to prepare for the eventual day in which he would be king. But no matter how much he tried, he could not shake his fears of father and his unpredictable and violent nature. He tried to reassure himself that the future was secure. And that both Aegon and Visenya were born and consecrated in the sacred oils of the Seven. But as all sat down, father's fearsome gaze unnerved him. What are you plotting, boy? Father demanded. I plot nothing, father, he quickly replied. Thankfully, Varys appeared to have something to say. Your Grace, I have important news to bring. It is of the highest importance that you hear it at once. Father kept his gaze fixed on Roriger. It was as though the spider had not spoken at all. Until he clicked his tongue and gestured to the Master of Whispers. What news is there, Varys? He demanded. It is in Lies, my king. Where the newest First Magister, Valerius Daltala, has begun to make himself and his city far more powerful than ever before, he explained. How? Father demanded with a frown. He has re-established the triarchy of Lies, Myr and Tioche, your Grace, he replied. Whatever Varys was going to say, never did Roriger think that this would ever be the answer. They've re-established the triarchy. What in the seven hells? That hasn't been in Essos ever since Sharako Lohar was killed and the three cities fought each other in the aftermath. This is ill news, my king, said Staunton. That is obvious, Lord Staunton, father snapped whilst he rolled his eyes. They were an enemy of House Targaryen at the time that they were last formed. What is to say that they will not be an enemy of House Targaryen once again, my king, suggested Sir Gerald. Father nodded at that, before pursing his lips. What other news from this newly reformed triarchy, Lord Varys? Asked Roriger. Whilst it would appear that all of the power is shared between the three cities as it had been the case in the previous triarchy, my prince, it is evidently clear that all of the power is held by the very man whom reformed it, said Varys. Valerius Daltala, said father. Quite so, your Grace. A man whom may already have a traitor serving him from Westeros, your Grace, suggested Merryweather. Father narrowed his eyes at the Lord of Longtable at that. What do you mean, Lord Merryweather? He demanded. I mean to say, my king, that we need only remember that Lord Rickard Stark has traded recently with Valerius. Trading iron, steel and ironwood for Lies Nade in building his canal. These are resources in which can be used for their armies and fleets, he said. Roriger didn't like how father narrowed his eyes even further at that. Would the Starks dare to betray me? Betray their king? Father demanded. I hardly think that the North is much concern, your Grace. They have never been as such in the past. Never has there been a threat from the North, Sir Gerald advised. Perhaps not, your Grace. But with the triarchy as a potential ally and benefactor, there is no telling what the Starks may do, suggested Staunton. Harlon 7. Built next to a village under the banner of House Mallister, was the first of such trading posts in the Riverlands. It was small in size. It was circular in shape. And with stone walls 10 feet high. And the walls were as thick as a wagon. Inside were a few houses, a tavern and a large storehouse. It was a design that both Harlon and Roderick had designed when they had come to plan these trading posts. And this one, the Eagles Ford trade post, was one of two of the riverlands which both Harlon and Roderick had negotiated to build with the consent of Lord Hoster Tully when they had met in Riverrun. It is good to see it in person. To show how much we have progressed, Harlon commented. It is. Though it appears small, I can guarantee you one thing for certain, my friend. And what's that, good brother? That storehouse inside, a year from now, perhaps even a few moons from now, will be overflowing with trade goods, with which to bring to the Iron Islands. And those goods can find themselves in the markets of not only the Iron Islands, but also across all of the 7 kingdoms. Which would line our coffers and the coffers of Pike's bannermen, said Roderick. Indeed. Though a lawful seafarer's life is not as exciting or as thrilling as that of a reaver's, I can see a good many captains take up the life of a merchant than that of a raider, said Harlon. Aye, as can I. If only all captains of the Iron Islands could be convinced of the merits of such a thing, Roderick muttered. Aye, that is a headache waiting to happen. But it is one in which we must endure. For never did I expect all captains of the Iron Islands to accept the new way without question. Regardless. We have come a long way, said Harlon. We have come further than ever before in ending the stranglehold of the old way, that does choke the life from the Iron Islands. So long as captains do provide goods for the markets of the Iron Islands, as well as coin for the small folk of the Iron Islands, then many will not see the need to raid and reeve to provide for one's family. Ah, but you forget, my friend. We still have far more to do, replied Roderick as they rode around the trade post once more. Before they looked down on the village that neighbored the trade post, whose small folk welcomed the trade post as a chance to make coin by building it. But now they fretted over the Ironborn whom called it home. You cannot argue that we are doing far better than 10 years ago, said Harlon. None can deny that, my friend. None at all. But this alone is not enough, Roderick replied. What do you mean? What more can be done? After your Lord Father led the Iron Fleet to fight Malis the Monstrous, our reward was only plunder. No recognition. Above all, as well as showing the mainlanders that we can adapt to the ever-changing world, we must show that we can provide for the Iron Islands. Both in times of war, but especially in times of peace. I see your reasoning, my friend. And we can do that. So long as we build these trade posts across the 7 kingdoms, and have a trading presence in each of these kingdoms, then we can send most of these goods back home and sell the rest back home in the Iron Islands. As well as providing for our people, we may also gain the respect of the mainlanders. Both lowborn and highborn, Harlon said as they rode past a small group of small folk whom glared with suspicion at them. Ironborn cowards, he heard one mutter. Harlon frowned at hearing them call them that. And as often, when confronted by the legacy left behind by his forebears and ancestors, he wondered. He wondered why should they be even doing this? Why should they be committed to this path if they would never truly gain the respect of the mainlanders? What is the point of doing this if they will only ever see them as raiders and reavers? Roderick saw the frown on his face. Steel your heart, Harlon. Harlon turned to him as his good brother patted him on the back. I heard plenty of this talk in Harrenhal. As did I. But every time they say such things, I wonder how easier it would be if we did not disappoint them and raided across Westeros as our ancestors had done, Harlon admitted. Do not think such things, Harlon. I know that it hurts your heart to hear them talk of us as such. But what we do, it will guarantee peace for our people. So that there is never another repeat of what Johanna Lannister did to the Iron Islands. Or a repeat of when Duncan the Tall, Trold Lannister and Byrne Stark invaded and slew your grandfather Harlon and your great-grandfather, the last Reaver, Roderick said strongly and with conviction. Harlon nodded as he heard Roderick's words. Roderick patted his back once more. So long as we do this, then all is well. When the time comes, you will rule the Iron Islands and there will be peace. And there will be both peace and prosperity by the time that Theon sits on the Seastone chair. One of the principal reasons for why I do this. For Theon and Asher. That they will never have to do this. Or fret over whether to stick to the old way or adapt to the new way. Vargid 7. I assume that you have heard, asked Vargid, stepping into Valerie's solar. He looked up from his letters and reports. Heard what? He asked. There have been an influx of small folk, mostly homeless and low-born tradesmen, leaving by ship for Driftmark in Westeros. Driftmark. Whatever for? Asked Valeries. Apparently, Lord Valerian has been rebuilding what was lost in the Dance of the Dragons, and that includes a ruined castle and town on his island. And many unemployed and homeless here are taking this as a chance to leave Lies for good and settle in Driftmark for a fresh start. Valeries hummed as Vargid sat down. Where they leave, more settle in Lies. The departure of the undesirable elements of the homeless and the overflowing amounts of tradesmen does such wonders for Lies the lovely. To what extent? Asked Vargid. Well, by the time that all of my plans have come to fruition, Lies shall stand as a beacon of Valerian civilization for all the world to see. And none visiting our great city shall ever be disgusted by the sights of those in squalor or the poorest slums in Lies, he explained. And how is that possible? Well, by which time, those slums shall be replaced by far more better housing and streets better suited to the good people of Lies. All provided for by the humble and hard-working First Magister of Lies. Vargid nodded at that. There is sense in what he is doing. Though it does mean fewer willing recruits for my armies and my fleets. But there are always the villages and towns surrounding Lies. Under Valerie's orders, Vargid had begun to issue commands to conscript an army for Lies. Hundreds and thousands of homeless men and boys from the city and from the villages and towns on mainland Essos had been cajoled to serve in the new Lies army and in Lies fleets. This was in stark contrast in the past, when Lies and citizens would never normally take up arms to fight for Lies, either on land or at sea, with the conclave of magisters preferring instead to hire free companies and sell swords such as Vargid to do their fighting for them. It was the same in both Myr and Tioche. Many of his recruits were slaves, either former or escaped slaves. The former slaves found work either as soldiers or in logistical positions, whilst the escaped slaves were given the choice of either service in the army or in the fleets or a torturous execution. It was an effective system, Vargid found, to the extent that it provided Lies a standing army of 12,000 fighting men and 5,000 in logistical positions. Whilst in the fleets, already 25 warships had been built. Both the new Lysan fleet and the Lysan army were equipped with ships, swords and weapons forged from the resources provided from their northern trading partners. There is also the nobility, said Vargid. What of them? They have contributed no sons, nor ships nor even coin to the new army and fleet of Lies. Perhaps, their sons can be gifted commanding positions in the fleets and army. Valeries nodded at that. A fine idea. One in which I shall implement at the next conclave. And with this, Lies shall serve as a fine example to follow by our fellow members of the Triarchy, said Valeries. It shall. But it is missing something ironclad to reinforce not only the Triarchy but also your rule over Lies and the Triarchy, Vargid explained. Such as what, Vargid? A victory. An unquestionable victory. One in which shall delight the Lysan peoples and make them proud of their city and their First Magister. And believe in the Triarchy. And the glories told from such victories shall encourage more to fight for Lies on the battlefield, Vargid replied. Valeries smirked at that. Again, a fine suggestion you offer. And it is coincidental you say that. Why coincidental? Asked Vargid. I have received a letter asking for help, he said, holding up a letter. Whilst not able to read the contents of the letter from where he was sat, Vargid saw the seal of the tiger. I didn't think that the proud and mighty tigers of Volantis would dare ask for help from their neighbors, Vargid commented. With great reluctance, I am sure, but it is against a great horde of Dothraki, led by the dreaded Kulbabo. And I have agreed already to send help. Help which you and our new army shall provide it. As well as one more recruit. What recruit? Asked Vargid. Valeries turned his gaze from Vargid and to the door. Bacietos. Is he here? Whom is he talking about? He is, Exo, he replied. Excellent. Bring him in, said Valeries. Vargid regarded his good father as Bacietos opened the door. Whom is this that joins our council? Asked Vargid. He is but someone I have prepared for the day in which he can be of great service to Lies. The time is now. And under your watchful eye. Bacietos entered the solar with a young Valerian man. Perhaps 20, Vargid thought. He was taller than Vargid, whom was 6.5 feet tall. The boy was a few inches taller. His arms and legs were thick with muscle and no fat whatsoever, separating him from the sons of the Lysan nobility. His neck and belly were also thick and showed no evidence of fat. His hair was long and reached down to his shoulders. He was far from handsome. He had a hard and square jaw, resembling a bull more so than a man. Whilst his frown left long marks on his face along with a few scars. He has the look of a ferocious warrior. Vargid, this is my ward. Maegor Blackfear, the son of Malis Blackfear. He will join you and Lai's army in the campaign in Volantis against Kulbabo. Notes. Though they have done well so far, the Greyjoys have a long way to go to prove themselves as a peaceful people, contrary to what history tells. Whilst Vargid is introduced to Valerie's ward, Maegor Blackfear,